Truth be told, I'm still not sure how or when I came to this place. I have the memories, the whole chain of factors is all there. It's just buried and muddled, and I find my head swimming trying to piece it together. Which is why I don't bother. I mean, why should I? I have everything I want here at the lake house. My pantry's almost bursting at the seams with cans and other non-perishables. I don't remember the last time I went on a supply run, but I know I won't have to for a very, very long while, and for that I'm glad. I'm so lucky. The lake is beautiful, and I have it all to myself. There aren't many that can say the same. Every day I go down with a camping chair, sometimes a cushion or a towel, and sit on the beach with some smokes. If it's the evening, I'll bring a few beers, but I try not to overdo it. It's not like I'm partying. Imagine that, partying. God forbid. Too hectic for me, no thank you. I do have internet out here, and of course it's terrible. I watch the occasional movie or show, even if they buffer every 10 seconds, but I always find my eyes being drawn to the window, to the gentle waters. The lake is a mute mother, my wordless company. And if that wasn't enough, my lake is special. It's strange to put into words, trust me. I know, but recently it seems like the lake's grown. The opposite shore looks so far away. At first I hardly noticed. Then, after I registered the change, it's grown more and more for every perfectly still night that passes. Other people might be concerned, so it's a good thing I'm not other people. I was going to say I'd hold up in the shoe, but I've never been to prison. I did get held in jail for a couple of weeks once, and if there's one thing I wanted as much as being released for trial was solitude. Manslaughter sure isn't a pretty label, although it's certainly better than murder. Well, technically it was gross negligence, but let's not get into that. Not here. Anyway, none of that matters. I have my home on the lake. The lake. What was I saying? Oh, right. Like I said, the lake's getting bigger. I can't understand how I didn't notice until the other side was at least 5, maybe 6 times further away than it had been before. Within a few days, I had to squint to see the far shore. It was like seeing Calais from Dover, just a ferry away. So yeah, most people would be confused, even scared. Not me. The further it is, the better. After all, the past only ever recedes from the now, and my past is anywhere that isn't here. Still, it's got me thinking. When did I come here? I have my dad's old maroon, 74 Chevelle parked out front, so there must be a road. I should probably service her. Weeds have grown around her flat tires. I should, and I would, but I don't feel like going for a drive. The only time I need to is for supply runs, and for now, I'm all set. I wonder where Dad's at now, what he's doing, you know. He'd adore this place, but I don't ever remember him visiting. He probably never wants to see me again after what happened. This is good, writing my thoughts like this. As much as I enjoy my own company, blowing off pressure helps, even if it's just pen on paper. Yeah, it's like having a valve or a spigot on my head that I can turn to release steam. Imagine that. I'll probably move this into a computer document, but all I have is a shitty desktop. Paper I can bring anywhere. Well, the beach, mostly. I think I'm done for today, though. I'm looking at the lake's mirror-like surface, and it's telling me I've done enough. You can rest now, it says. God, why me? Why did this have to happen? Shit, I shouldn't start with reactions and no context. No point in jumbling the timeline of events. This morning, I was sitting in front of the little overhang on the beach, the one with vines dangling from it. I had a mug of coffee and cigarettes. It was dreamy and serene. Halfway through a white stick, something surged up out of the water, breaking the stillness. It really pissed me off. I picked up a rock to throw at what I thought was a fish, which is when I saw what had surfaced. Not a fish. I'm not sure I ever believed it was. Fans of dark graying hair rose and fell with the ripples. A body, a human body, face down, floating a stone's throw offshore. A sudden wave grew and crested out of nowhere and sent the body on a spinning course directly towards me. It started to twitch after coming to a rest, disturbing the smooth pebbles around it. Then it got up. It wasn't a dead body, of course. Wasn't even a zombie. I should have been cautious. I should have been horrified. Perhaps I was in the split second before I saw their face. Mom came to visit. I couldn't believe it. Moments before, I was only angry. When I saw it was her, that quickly faded. No one's ever visited me before, not here, and I always thought they should quell the effort. I wouldn't appreciate their company, but it was my mom, and I was nothing but happy to see her again. She seemed vacant for a few seconds until her eyes went wide. After being washed up, she was understandably scared and confused. I'd be just the same. I'd be like that all the time without my lake. I managed to settle her nerves a little and had her wait while I went to fetch a second chair. I tore the shed apart trying to find one, but I couldn't. I'm so stupid. Why would there be another? This place is just for me. In the end, I rushed inside and snatched 2 cushions from the couch and hurried back to the beach. Mom was sitting in my chair. There were the inceptive sparks of an outburst flashing in my head, but it was Mom. I couldn't be angry at her, even if she was intruding. If anything, she should have been angry with me. She should have been seething with rage. She wasn't. I'd have let her sit there, but I wanted to talk eye to eye. Figuratively speaking, I wanted her down at my level. So she came over and sat beside me on the other cushion and held my hand. I was happy to sit there in silence, so she was the first to break it. "Remember the zoo?" I did, and I knew exactly where she was going. There was that playground right at the back, and you wanted to go on the spinning disc. The big, grippy one with handles where a bunch of kids like you could all squeeze on and have their dads spin it around. Ugh, grazed the skin off my knees. Mom snorted, her eyes drifting as the memory replayed in her head. Even if I was only a boy then, just thinking of it made me embarrassed. Embarrassment, I'd left that on the curb a long time ago, but it was fast and relentless enough to catch up with me when it needed to. And you were insistent, so me and your dad let you ride it. If they gave out awards to kids who could scream loudest, you'd get the gold medal. By the time it had stopped, you were all frozen up, frozen solid. You'd have a trophy for boy with the strongest grip, too. I mean, really, it even took Dad some effort to pry you off of there. Looking back at the past was itself a thing of the past, a thought that was emboldened as I stared across the lake to where the other side used to be, and still I laughed along with her. There are gems to be found in the mud, and although I'm never willing to dig for them myself, I'll gladly watch another get their hands dirty so I can reap the rewards. Mom went on for a while, reminiscing, flooding me with nostalgia. I was happy she'd come. I think if it were anybody else, I'd have cast them right back into the lake. Maybe she knew that. I was happy until she thrust the shovel into the grave of the very thing I hoped I'd buried deep enough to forget. In the same soft voice, she asked me, "Do you know what it's like to die of thirst?" A crack formed. "Do I what, Mom?" "Oh, it's nothing really. Your skin goes all rough and dry. Your tongue gets scalloped and swells up like your mouth's full of wool. I found out what water sucked out of a concrete wall tastes like, though there wasn't much anyway, even if it was raining out. If you went back there today, you'd probably find the bits of my teeth that were chipped and scraped off." The crack widened into a fissure. Mom's voice was lower now, scratchy, though some of the warmth remained, if that was ever real, and I don't know if it was. "How was your getaway, sweetie? To Ben's cabin? Did you have fun? Did you relish in trapping me in the basement before you left? I'm sure you did. You probably got off on imagining me scared, confused, and dying." Mountains split and fell to the chasm as it gaped open. It all came rushing back. The garage door opening and closing. Rushing outside to get in Ben's car and stopping at the last second to make sure everything was locked up, including the basement door, left ajar with the key still in the lock. "Mom, why?" I bit back my words as she turned and fixed me with 2 completely dead eyes. There wasn't a hint of emotion in them, even as her eyelids drooped. Her lips, however, were curled into a faint smile. When she spoke, her voice this time was a rabid hiss, like she couldn't keep up with her own words or her lungs weren't working right. "Why? Why? What fucking right do you have to ask that, you pasty little shit?" She leaned in, arching unnaturally towards me to match the growing hate in her voice. I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't listen. "If you were just 1 hour earlier, I'd have lived, but we wouldn't want that now, would we? Oh no, the poor, troubled boy has to get his kicks somehow." "That isn't, you were already." Mom contorted her face into a bitter mockery of concern, eyebrows sloped and lips pursed. "What was it, Honeybun? Was Daddy too distant, too cold? Was it that fat lump of lard who bullied you at school? Or were you just born this fucked up?" I found my voice and cried out, "Stop it! It wasn't my fault. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." This just served to animate her further. She reared up, coiled all out of shape. I heard the crackle of dry skin the color of ash, and when she opened her mouth, her lips split and oozed a foul black fluid. This time my body replied, and I twisted away, jamming my palms into the sand. Before I could get up, bowed fingers latched around my forearm and held me tight. I looked down. Mom had caught me and dug her coarse, filthy nails into my skin. It burned. It burned so bad that an electric shock went all the way up my arm, and I swear I heard flesh sizzling. Without moving her shoulders, her neck stretched out so we were at eye level. In a voice like spiders burning in a fire, she said, "Oh, sweetie, it's okay. You've got an ouchie, don't you? I know what'll make you feel better. Come get a kiss from dear old Mama." "Shut up!" I screamed, thrusting my arms out to shove her away. When my hands drove into her ribs, she stopped, looked down at my hands, then back up to me with a smile. Then Mom disintegrated. And no, I don't mean she just vanished. If only it had been that easy. The form and shape of my mother collapsed into a mass of tiny, writhing bodies. They looked like some kind of crustacean, little translucent shrimp things that hopped around like fleas on a hot plate and swarmed back to where they came from, back to the lake and into its depths. I don't know why I even wrote about this. It hurt, still does. A disgusting horde of water bugs talked with me for a solid 30 minutes, and I believed it was Mom. At least I know it wasn't her, but the damage is done. I was so close to burying that memory forever and forgetting what I've done. I'm staying inside for the rest of today. I can't go near there right now. At least I can see it from this window. Not a ripple in sight. I can see the car too. It's pretty. But when I look at it now, all I think of is sitting in the driver's seat, parked in the driveway, watching faceless people carrying a stretcher with a long black bag on it. I don't think I moved for a full 24 hours. Not until the taxi dropped Dad home after he flew back from Japan. The only reason he gave me his Chevelle is so I could be gone by the morning and never come back. In a few days, I'll be back down by the lake. I know it. I'm also pretty sure some of those shrimp things got on me, so I'm keeping an eye out around the house. Okay, I'm done. I've spent the last of what I have writing this. I feel like curling into a ball under my bed. They're in the house. I swear I checked myself up and down, damn near burned my skin off in the shower, but they still got in somehow. I crushed the bastards, but some got away, and I don't know where they're hiding now. Whatever the hell these crab shrimp creatures are, it looks like there has to be a lot of them to camouflage themselves. I haven't seen them try to take the form of a person or anything else. With a few, I can cull them and prevent them from multiplying. If I leave them too long, well, I'm not going to do that. It's been 3 days since I last wrote. I've been too afraid to leave, afraid of those things breeding in unchecked corners, but I need to get out. I can't stay inside. The walls are heavy. The ceiling's pressing down on me. Dusk is coming. I'm going down to the lake, to a spot as far from the overhang as possible. I need to see the lake before it gets dark, to stare into the vanishing point where it kisses the clear sky. This time, though, I'm bringing this paper. If there's anything new or noteworthy, I want to record it as I see it. I can't rely on my memory. Made my way out to one of the big moraine boulders in the water, an island of its own, although it isn't very comfortable. I never usually come out here, but I haven't seen any of those bugs. It's pretty dark, though. At least I can see the stars. The stars, they're so far away. When I look up at them, it's like I'm dreaming, wondering what it'd be like to be one, off in some hidden-away nebula in the corner of an unnamed galaxy. I think I'll just stare a while. The reflections are gone. I don't know what happened, but the lake is dark and muddied and ignorant of the night sky. There isn't a star reflected on its surface. That's okay, though. I guess the lake just gets like that sometimes. I don't like to look at it when it's like that. I'd rather admire the stars. It's getting cold, so I'm going inside to sleep this off. Ever since those things masquerading as Mom paid me a visit, every day has felt like a nightmare. Hopefully I'll wake from it by the morning. Well, today's been better. When I got back last night, I went in the bathroom to brush my teeth and was absolutely disgusted to find a stream of those tiny crustaceans practically erupting from the base of the mirror. I didn't care. I fucking burned them because that's what they deserve. The scorch marks on the sink will have to wait until later to be cleaned. Aside from that, I slept quite well, and no, I didn't find any in my bed. That doesn't mean they aren't there. They could be, sure. But out of sight, out of mind. Oh, and if it wasn't already clear, I don't blame the lake for what happened. Yes, those things came from it, and I'm sure there's plenty of horrors gliding around its depths, but there's also many a beauty to be seen. The lake accepts all, no matter where you stand. The reflections came back when I went down to shore. In fact, the lake is more flat and mirror-like than it ever has been before. I'd put the pen down here if that's all there is to it. Of course I saw something. I was reclined on the soft gravel slope, letting my head drain and empty and my eyes surf across the horizon, taking slow drags of a cigarette and letting smoke billow between my teeth. Then I spotted a dark blot, breaking the otherwise perfect scene. I struggled to make out what it was aside from, well, a blot that was dark. Whatever it was, I could tell it was approaching the shore, approaching me. Soon, it became obvious that the shape was above water. Not a thing of the lake, but of land. It was a boat, and the natural conclusion would be that someone was sailing that boat. Who? They're close now. From the rate they've been sailing at, I'd give them a good 20 minutes before they get here. Let's see if I'm right. I would bet on it if only there was someone to bet against. Oh, my smoke's gone out. Damn. Got ash on the page, too. What the hell? My ears just started ringing, and it feels like thumbtacks are being driven into my temples. They waved. At first, I didn't register it as such, but they waved at me. How is this possible? I didn't think. Oh, no. They just called out my name. He knows my name. How does he know? Who told him? When? Shit, what do I do? If he can come here, anyone can. No, that can't be right. He's here. So, good news and bad. The good news is that he wasn't those shrimp things. He's real. A real, honest-to-God human being. And out of anyone he could have been, guess who? Ben. It's Ben. I didn't even remember him until those things mentioned him. It hurt to see him after so long. I can't help but associate him with the memory of what I did to my own mother. My rock. He moored the boat to a piece of dead tree jutting out near the shoreline that didn't look remotely stable, then jumped out and stood there for a while, taking in the surroundings. The lake house. My house. After he was done admiring the place, he turned in my direction and made his way over, and said that, why am I paraphrasing? I remember it exactly. These things don't happen often, that is to say, they never happen. So when they do, it's only natural that the memory of it is near photographic, word for word. Ben looked me in the eyes as he said, "Nice place. It's, comfortable." I broke from staring and shifted my gaze to the ground. It didn't feel good, looking at him. The familiarity was scalding. Yeah. You come down here a lot? Still staring down into round, gray pebbles, I frowned. Yeah. I can see why. Man, it's just serene. Ben peered out across the lake, while my eyes stayed confined to the long-ago smooth stones. Everything seemed so loud, I heard every breath he took like it was played through a stage amp. The silence was worse, so I broke it first. How'd you get here, Ben? Well, I mean, by boat, obviously, but how long did it take? And how did you even know where to? Dude, I didn't come all this way so you could hear me moan and groan about how awful it was. And yes, it was, but this isn't about me. I miss you, man, and I'm not alone. We all miss you. You don't have to be alone either, and I know you may not think so, but we still care. My eyes pulled away from the ground, and I looked at Ben. I looked long and hard into his eyes. God, those eyes. There was no falsity there, and no doubt either, regardless of how hard I searched for it. Still, it wasn't enough. I'm fine here. This is my peace. If you cared, you'd accept that. Ben paused for a moment, long enough for a smile to creep across his face. It wasn't like Mom's smile, bitter and lifeless. It was only hopeful, and just as genuine as those eyes still were. I do. Now he was the one to look down at the ground. I know you're relaxed here, but is that all you want, to relax? I know what it's like. After a while, I would start to worry about whether I'd be able to instead of actually relaxing. You spend too long in your own company, and it gets stagnant. That sharp pain in my head shot back. I didn't like it, because pain makes me angry. All I could muster as a reply was a simple, quiet grunt. Look, I want to help you, but I can only help you if I want to be helped. Shock flashed across Ben's face, quickly replaced by something more sympathetic. No, not sympathetic. Pitying. More of the same thing I've been supplied with in abundance my whole life. I don't need it. I'm sorry and all that you came this far for nothing. Please go. He stuttered like he wanted to try and change my mind, but he gave up. Fine, but I'll be back again. And not because I expect you to decide differently, just because I still care. With that, he boarded his vessel and untied the knot. The boat drifted out onto the lake, Ben standing and watching me with that ever-present smile of his, only now with the barest tinge of defeat that stopped it from reaching his eyes. He'd left at my request. That alone sort of left me dumbstruck, because I wanted him to change my mind. I want so desperately for someone to do it for me, and I just sent that someone packing. Maybe I'm more like Dad than I thought. And what he said about relaxing, he's absolutely right. I can't deny it now. The words have been spoken, acknowledged. But he's coming back, and that sets my heart at ease, because as distant as the past has become, the future might be making a turn. Left, right, doesn't matter, as long as it gets me off this road. I just hope it isn't a U-turn. Ben, when are you coming back? It's been 2 days, and there's nothing out on the lake. He probably forgot. Yeah, that sounds right. I know I keep calling it a lake, but now it's really more like an ocean. There's nothing to be seen, shore to flat skyline. Actually, wait, I need to check something. I think someone's here with me. It was bad enough when I came out and found the road, or where a road should have been entirely swallowed up by lake water. But what sent me into shallow breaths was the flattened grass running down the bank beside the gravel drive. The Chevelle's gone. Something pushed it into the lake. I can't see it, but where else could it be? Doesn't matter. I wasn't putting it to any use. It seems like the lake is the only place anything can go anymore. Oh, Ben's here. He's calling my name from outside. Thank whatever trigger made him remember. I can't wait to talk to him. Shit! Holy Jesus, I know. I need to double-check the locks. It wasn't him. I stepped out the front door and saw it in the bushes under the trees. I thought I was looking at a weird stump or log until it moved. God, how do I even describe that thing? Brown, bruisey carapace. At least 15, no, 20 legs, all shuddering and twitching like some enormous deformed spider, and that wasn't even the worst part. When it reared up out of the bushes, where there might have been eyes, was instead Ben's bloody, eyeless head, chopped off and fused at the neck. He had kept calling to me, even as I stumbled screaming inside. I'm huddled up in the bathroom right now. I know it's still out there because it's crawling on the house. Each step is vibrating through me. I can't say how many legs it has, but they're sharp and spiny, and there's tiles falling off the roof, smashing on the rocks outside. Ben's still calling out for me, although now I can hear the sound of clacking chelicerae beneath. He sounds desperate. He sounds enraged. The things he's saying are vile. It's hurting me. Sticks and stones? Bullshit. I'm sorry I can't write and press my hands over my ears at the same time. The thing finally stopped running circles around the house. It settled by the front door, and it's still sitting there, perched, ready to spring at any sign of the door opening. I know because I can see it through the frosted glass. A dark, hulking haze of malice, only letting out the occasional shudder or click. This is too much. I need to see the lake, even if it's just a peep. I need to. He's coming. Oh, thank God, any God that heard me, and the ones who listened. Only a faint dot for now, but one growing into a mighty, indomitable circle that could roll over even the most hideous of things and flatten them into nothing. Even the thing shivering outside the front door. I should warn him about it. How? I'm terrified of making a sound, of making myself known. Right now I'm just trying to ignore it. Long enough to shift it into the periphery, but not too long as to forget. I don't have the luxury to forget anymore, because if I do, there'll be nothing left. It's okay. He can handle it, I'm sure. I feel so stupid. Ben moored at the beach and jogged up the path to my door. I wasn't even sure he'd noticed the creature till he looked. He sort of grimaced a bit, but that was it. Like it was a damn mouse or something. This badass motherfucker shoved it out the way so he could get to the door. And guess what happened? It disintegrated. Tiny, hopping lake bugs. The shrimp things. I'm so embarrassed, being that frightened of something I could break with a flick of a finger. I guess I won't have time to copy these papers over to the computer. Oh well, it's not like I want to reread these. Is this a journal? A diary? If nobody's going to read it, then it isn't anything. Whatever you are, I'm sorry to leave you so suddenly, but I need to go. I can't spend a minute longer here, and Ben's knocking at the door, calling my name. The real Ben. Goodbye. The fact that these words are here means I failed. I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. Ben, everyone, I've failed. Even with your help, something I never deserved in the first place. I think it was always meant to be like this. That I would be here by the lake forever. Ben looked surprised when I came outside and asked to leave. Surprised, but happy. How easy it is for someone like him to misjudge panic for enthusiasm. Either way, we bounded down to the beach, to the boat, and for the first time in forever, I set foot on something that wasn't the beach or the house, the island. Just standing in the small rowing boat made my head spin and my legs weak. I kept glancing back at the house, but I'd had enough of it. And Ben, you kind idiot. He told me to sit back and breathe while he rowed. I nearly scoffed at him before realizing I wasn't actually breathing. When I breathed out, it was like every muscle in my body deflated, opening the gates to a slow wave of dread. He asked about the wound on my arm too, but I just told him I burned it on an oven tray. I could tell he wasn't convinced, but he didn't press any further. It still hurts. When I think of Mom, the scabs start to throb and flush with heat, so I'd rather just forget. All things considered, it was calm as could be, calm as it had ever been, and all the while my fingers were wrapped tight around the rim of the boat. White-knuckled, frozen, mind running away, imagining all the awful things that might be snaking and swimming about beneath us, past where the sunlight can't reach. Ben was unfazed, though, so in the end I just watched him and focused on the hypnotic motion of his rowing. It was calm until we went far enough for the horizon to roll away and reveal what lay ahead. I physically recoiled when I saw them. Clouds of pure pitch, clusters of them, swollen and lumpy. Below them, a distant and thick haze of rain, illuminated by sparse lightning flashes. The beats of my heart were so fast, so close together, it actually felt like my heart had stopped. The storm coated the horizon from end to end with its dark violence. No way over it, no way under it, no way around. "We're not going through that, right?" I stammered. Ben kept his eyes forward as he answered. "We have to. There's no other way." I could hear it now. Deep rumbling and a downpour so heavy it was like static screeching in my ears, filling my head and burning away thought. No, I didn't think it would be like this. I can't, Ben. I can't. I won't make it. I had to shout over the winds now rushing past us. "Stop! Take me back!" "No! We're doing this." His voice was low, brimming with resolve, and somehow able to be heard through the gale. "I won't let you go back there. I'm getting you out." My eyes flicked between him and the clouds. "I don't have the strength." This time he turned around to reveal his eyes, burning with intensity. "You're never going to have the strength without doing this first." The storm loomed over us, and I could only stutter and whine. Foreign emotions exploded in a tornado of pain, fear, and longing. I felt sure in that moment that if I let Ben carry me into it, the world would collapse and crush me like I'd always feared. He couldn't hear me anymore over the great cyclone. He couldn't hear the boat creaking as I stood up. He couldn't hear my wheezing breath. He couldn't hear my shoes shuffling. And no sooner did Ben whip around than I had leapt over the stern and into the lake. He screamed a hopeless, wretched scream, but it was cut off and replaced by the muffled sound of the lake in my ears. I don't really remember how I got back. There was a pull, like a riptide, or maybe a thermal current. I remember thinking that nothing else mattered except getting away. My arms and legs were flailing, and before long I was tired out. I guess the lake carried me back to shore. Ben's gone, swallowed by the storm, no doubt. I don't see how anyone could survive out there. And I am here. So stupid. Why did I think I could last a minute away from here? I'm such a fucking idiot. Stupid. Looks like I have the time to type this all up. How much is left? How much time? I'll just keep writing, keep clacking these keys until the clock stops. No point in splitting these entries up anymore. Not that I put dates down in the first place. What is the date? The calendar program isn't working. The lake is the same all the time, so I don't know what season it is. The same, always the same. I don't know how long it's been, but I know one thing. The lake is rising. Most of the beach is already gone, and it keeps creeping closer, and even now there isn't a ripple to be seen. There is something, though, beneath the surface. If it's trying to hide from me, then its efforts are misguided because it's huge. The big spider shrimp thing from before is like a dust mite in comparison. Whatever it is, massive and dark, it's following the lake. It's rising up, too slowly to see it moving. Maybe it's been rising this whole time, too slow for me to notice. Maybe it is the lake, and the water's just an extension of itself. I hear dripping. It's getting louder. I need to go to the beach one more time before it's lost forever. No. I went outside, and that thing in the water started moving. I saw it. Two parts of equal magnitude started to separate, leaving an abyss between them. I think it was a mouth, big enough to eat the island, and then some in one bite. It stopped after I went inside. There's people on the beach? No, more like ghosts. Are they dead? They might be the same as me. Alone. Have I really been alone this whole time, or were they there too? Why couldn't I see them until now? They can't see me. I threw rocks at them, and I couldn't tell if they got hit. The rocks just kept returning to my hand like I hadn't thrown them in the first place. I used to be one of them, I think. A ghost. What am I now? I'm even less. Can ghosts die? Can ghosts have ghosts? I have to stop this. The thing in the water, the Leviathan, I think it's speaking to me. It's telling me everything's okay, that I can rest now. Same as what the lake always said. The same, always the same, always. The Leviathan says there's no way back, no way but to give up. Dead-end road. My car's gone. Dad's car, that old Chevelle, sunk into its bed. Dad, where are you? Hi, Dad. I didn't think you'd visit. I know, I'm sorry. It's all I've had to think about for years. It was all my fault, and I've thought about it over and over and over until I couldn't remember anymore. Please don't leave me again. Dad, please don't go out there. Please. Drove away. He drove off in the Chevelle. How is that possible? He can't forgive me. How could he? I'm a murderer. He's never coming back. Ben isn't coming back either because he can't forgive me for what I've done. Where did it go wrong? Mom had the softest voice. Perfect for lullabies. Round and round the garden like a teddy bear, one step, two step, missing you under here. I miss you. Under here, under, past it all, I'm forgetting it all. I can feel it staring at me through the window. It's waiting. It'll wait for as long as it needs to. God, I've waited too long. I waited for the storm to settle, but it never did. It never will. I'm grinding my teeth so I can sit still. I keep finding broken teeth in the house. Must be mine, but there's too many. How many teeth do people have? I wonder how many everyone has. How many memories do we have? Who am I even talking to? Well, if you told me more often, maybe I'd remember. Sorry, I would come help at Nana's, but I need to get ready for the trip. Okay. Oh shit, I locked you in. I'm sorry. What? You put a box of china down there? Oh right, from Nana's. I almost left and locked you down there. Thank God. Yeah, I'll let you out now. Mom, where did you go? I can't block it out anymore. The Leviathan is screaming at me from the depths of its maw. Endless, grinding my teeth. It doesn't have any teeth, just a deep, dark pit. Someone's knocking at my door. I opened the door and the water's right up to the porch. The ground is gone. The trees are dead. The house is only here if I shut the door, but I'm not going to. I have to go. I'm sorry, Ben. Dad, I'm sorry. Do what you will. It's calling sweetly now. It's okay. Let's get this over and done with. Hey, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Thank you. I'm not. I'm nothing now, and that means everything to me. The water is at my knees. Whether I go or not, it'll swallow me up anyway. Long enough. Waited too long, too far gone, two's a crowd. The purest solitude is close, and soon there'll only be one. I've written and carved myself into the walls of the universe. I don't know if I've written enough, but it'll have to do. I'm going now. I'm finally going to be alone. Ben couldn't take me there, but the Leviathan can. Maybe I'll see you there, Mom. I hope not. I'm sorry. Good night, and I'll sleep tight. I missed the scorching wind of Andalusia, how it pours sunlight onto your face, toying with eyelashes, flattening dry sand against cheeks, and milling around hair. I missed the smell of the valley and that ripening softness of muscat fluff glistening in the afternoon breeze. From up here, I can see the house where I grew up. I see white chapels tucked into grape orchards like pawns scattered on a chessboard. I can see patches of asphalt on El Jardinito Road hailing from the old town through dappled rocks, then waning behind the horizon with erratic headlights of beat-up trucks cruising along. One of the pit stops along El Jardinito, where truck drivers stop to relieve themselves, marks the starting point to this wavy trail. All covered in blotches of spindly grass stalks and flaxen sand, the trail is barely noticeable at first. Truth is, no one even cares to notice it. Why would truckers taking a blitz leak care to check on a mucky trail leading to God knows where? But I do. This is how I got up here, to the top of this hill, where I am standing now. I've climbed all the way up here, so I can finally end it all these years of vagrancy and fugue, exile and fear. This is where it's all going to come to an end. Advertisements? But for now, I am enjoying the view of the valley unfolding below. I am sipping the air of what could be my final memories. He will show up soon. He always does. Like a shadow, he's been following me right on my footsteps, always there, behind me. And there he is. His limping figure appears behind the sharp bend off El Jardinito. He looks up and he sees me, then stops for a moment to catch his breath and leans on his cane as if assessing the remaining trajectory for this final stretch, then resumes his walk. Or should I say, resumes his agonizing trudging. Years of endless chase took a toll on his body. No wonder. How long has he been chasing me? 10, 20, 30 years. He is slow, methodically slow. But for once, I will not run. I will wait, right here behind this rock. I will finally come face to face with him. This sharp Swiss knife blade I am holding in my hand will soon lance right through his neck bone. Yes, that's what I am going to do. This ends here, at the dead end of this sandy trail, atop the hill overlooking the valley with its white chapels and muscat orchards. Funny, after all these years, I still don't know the real name of my chaser. I always called him what Master Borges called him. He who wanders. He who wanders, listen, I will kill you. Borges, the Borges. I idolized him when I was in college. Many did, but I was different. It was 1961. I was an average lazy learner at the Universidad Libre de Cordoba, floating around from one semester to another with barely passable grades. I had very few friends and almost no interests. One can say that I had an early form of an identity crisis. Besides chugging Anisado, my only other passion was literature, Latin American literature. Borges and Neruda were at the forefront. One could only imagine my excitement when I saw a pamphlet hanging on the wall of the literature faculty. Spaces were limited, but who cared? It was the man himself, Jorge Luis Borges, coming to give us a lecture followed by an open panel of questions. Like a maniac, I rushed to the auditorium hours before the lecture. I was the first in line, and when the doors opened, I got the front row seat. The auditorium was packed with drooling chins of young self-proclaimed prodigies, awaiting the arrival of the Great One. And there he was, the blind lord of literature, walking upright onto the stage with a cane and his loyal assistant right by his side. Standing ovation. He nodded and made a "Thank you, please be seated" gesture. Then he began. The lecture was dedicated to Spanish writers. I cannot distinctly recall if it was Cervantes or de Vega. It truly made no difference. Somehow I managed to sit through his entire lecture, which lasted over 3 hours, and remember nothing. He talked slowly and methodically, pouring honey into our ears like Segovia's guitar, with his absent eyesight affixed on the ceiling. And then it happened, something that caught me completely off guard. Before closing the day, Borges was about to take questions from the audience. Of course, I raised my hand, and so did about hundreds of other students. One of Borges' assistants whispered something into his ear, which made him smile. "It is an honor for me to be in front of an audience of young people, but our time is not infinite," he said with blind eyes, still pinned on the far corner of the hall. "For that reason, I will randomly pick questions from 5 of you. I have never won any prizes or lotteries in my life. When I played poker or blackjack, I lost far more than I won. I knew my limitations, and that turned me into an average apathetic person, rarely trying to outdo oneself. And so, sitting still with little ambition, I got used to that. Until that moment, when I saw Borges pointing his finger in my direction, that came as nothing short of a shock. Me? Yes, young man. Senator Borges picked you. Step forward and introduce yourself, said his assistant. I did not know what to ask, so I quietly mumbled my full name. Fernandez Augustin Navarro. Borges shifted his gray-shaded pupils in my direction, as if reacting to a sudden buzzing of a fruit fly. Fernandez Augustin Navarro. Navarro. Haven't I met you once before, young man? He asked. No, Senator Borges. I never had the honor. But you will. We will meet again, Senator Navarro. You and I will meet again. But for right now, what is your question? The rest of the day was foggy. I don't even remember what question I asked. It must have been about him winning the Prix International. Not sure. And maybe not important. No, not important at all. The greatest writer in the history of mankind called me by name, and then that bizarre, unreal thing he said about us meeting again. When? 9 years later, in 1970. And there I was, a somewhat promising journalist in one of London's somewhat scandalous tabloid newspapers. Every week my name was featured on the second page, alongside with celebrity chronicles and vile rumors. My paycheck was decent enough for a small studio flat by Manchester Square. After years of having been pent up by directionless studies, you could say I became something more than an average. Or at least that is what I believed. That day it was early October. Arguably the best season in London began as usual. I ate my chic breakfast consisting of 2 scrambled eggs, ham, toast, and dark roast coffee at Barrymore's Diner, and was ready for a pleasant walk to the office. It was shortly after 8 a.m., and I was in no hurry. My route was the same as it was every day. Past the square, right turn on George Street, left turn on Thayer, another right on Marylebone. My thoughts that morning were all preoccupied with the piece I was working on, so I was slowly making my way through the square when something caught my eye. Or rather, someone. At first, I did not pay much attention to him, no more than I did to anybody else who idled at the square that morning. Hippie rascals with soiled hair playing guitar on every corner was a common theme in those days, and London town was certainly no exception. So here was another one of those misunderstood love proclaimers sitting right behind the gated area of the square. Striped worn-out jacket, heavy cap, sandals with clots of woolen socks sticking out. A common hippie bum, as anyone may have thought. I thought so too, except this one had something that made my intestines churn. I didn't know what it was, but once I saw him, I felt the irresistible urge to instantly walk away and never see him again. The way he looked at me, that gloomy frown that made me think of a line from Oscar Wilde, that fellow's got to swing. There certainly was something outer-worldly about that fellow. His eyes, as if carved from a rock below his forehead, were mercilessly drilling thousands of tiny holes through me. I added pace. As I turned back one last time, I noticed him slowly walking towards me, past the gates of the square onto the street, paying no attention to screeching tires of honking cars, walking right towards me. He's just a bum? No, he is not. Just another one of those unwashed hippies. No, run, run, run. George Street was empty like in post-war bombed quarters. I could hear my brisk footsteps. Or was it the drubbing of my aorta against the chest? He was catching up. Run? Don't be silly. Yes, run. First slowly, as if you're trying to not show your chaser that you're scared. No, not scared, more like in a hurry. Why am I running? I can take him out with one punch. But it really wasn't about that. It was my first experience of that feeling, which I can only describe as some sort of primordial sense of fear, panic, dread, unexplained sense of looming doom arching above you like a dark figure with a scythe. I ran faster than my feet could move. As I turned the corner on Thayer, I paused and looked back, fearing to see him right behind. Scrambled eggs, toast, and dark roast coffee were about to make their way back up through my esophagus. Wiping the sweat off my palms onto my pants, I bent forward in a protective position and looked around. Empty windows of George Street were checking me out like a toddler witnessing parent in a cowardly act. Whoever that man was that incensed me into this uncontrollable panic, he was now gone. Shame on you, Fernandez Augustin, I repeated to myself while making futile attempts to enthrall palpitation to subside. Shame on you, I mumbled, repeating that word. Mumbling turned into whistling that song by Magic Lanterns. Shame, shame. I whistled, acting calm and self-composed. I sang without knowing words, only to convert my mind to something else. I sang so others wouldn't notice me shaking. I climbed the stairs of my office building, 3 at a time, 3rd floor. The familiar smell of typography oils calmed me down. Safe heaven. Shame on you, Fernandez Augustin Navarro. Even now I question myself whether my journey to madness began on that day, or was it underway for many years. Madness that creeps in and recedes in tidal waves. Is that how it usually happens? All I know is that an hour later I was laughing at my little moment of weaknesses. Preposterous and rubbish, my thick Andalusian twang spoke to me. The idea of being fully checked out by a specialist did cross my mind, and I immediately thought of Dr. Patel in Camden Town. He'd give me a comfortable medical diagnosis like a panic attack and prescribe some white pills, I thought. Little did I know that the day had more surprises in store. The unnerving script development continued in a more eerie fashion when my boss marched to my desk with a pack of printed paper. No, Navarro, you are not going to see Dr. Patel in Camden Town, who will make a judgment call on your insanity. Instead, you are going to do an article on Jorge Luis Borges' new book. He is making his presentation today at London Public Library and blah, blah, blah. I forgot about the panic attack. The thrill of seeing Master Borges again 9 years later was surreal. Moments later, I was sitting in a cab on my way to the London Public Library, scribbling all possible questions I should be asking him. L-Inform de Brody? Other books? Forget it. I knew very well what I would ask. I paid the cab and galloped up the marble stairs leading to the hallway where the master was about to hold his new book presentation. I elbowed myself through the crowd of journalists to occupy the coveted front row spot. Quick inventory check, wallet, J-sack along with the omnipresent Swiss knife. Seconds ticked leisurely on my wristwatch. 4 more minutes. Forget this morning's sickness. Forget Dr. Patel. Collect yourself, Fernandez Augustin. Navarro, that's your last name, isn't it? Yes, Senator Borges. But how do you? 9 years ago in Cordoba, I told you we would meet again. Do you remember? I nodded rapidly, completely forgetting he couldn't see me. Stupid. Perhaps, continued Borges, it would be more prudent for us to speak privately after the conference. I invite you to have coffee with me. You like Colombian coffee, Mr. Navarro. I shall see you precisely at 6 o'clock at the address that my assistant will provide. His blind eyes were still affixed at the top far corner of the hallway, far above all the congested, sharp-penciled critics and arduous followers of his divine writing. The attention was now all on me, as revealed by hundreds of photo flashes from behind. I thought of all the explaining that I would have to do tomorrow. How does Borges know you? Are you friends? You were raised in Cordova. Are you his illegitimate son? Back then I did not know. Answers came later. Memory is a tricky animal. As I gaze over the valley and satiate my lungs with familiar smells, I cannot think of anything specific. Vague and elusive memories of my childhood home, and these orchards, these white chapels, and the old town itself, nothing but an incomprehensible sensation somewhere down there, below the chest cage. Alas, nothing comes to mind. I've been robbed of my memory. You. I cast my eyes at the trail again. He is closing in. It's hard for him to walk upward, and yet I see that determination in his eyes, in his tight grip of that wobbly walking stick, in the way he periodically stops to catch his breath and eyeball the remaining distance. I am not going anywhere. 5, 10 more minutes. Come and take me, old man, if you can. I almost see his facial expression under the heavily pronounced frontal lobe. It's a grin. It's an expression that says, "We shall see." Once I read an interview in The Morning Times. In it, Borges was portrayed as extremely humble and minimalistic. His house was depicted as a perfectly organized space with easy access to everything. Books on the shelves judging from the admiration of the columnist. There were lots of them, were organized by theme and by title. Dictionaries and encyclopedias were grouped together on the same rack, so he could find them easily. In another article, dated 1966, I read that when Borges travels, and those travels were quite extensive, he carries a whole rack of books along, some of which may not even be read. When I entered his hotel room, that very book rack was the first thing that caught my eye. I stood perplexed at the multitude of titles, most unknown to me, when I heard the door swing wide open, and there he was entering through the doorway with a leisurely swinging cane. "Ah, Senator Navarro, how kind of you to visit this old man." I took a step towards him and produced some gibberish like, "Pleasure is all but mine." He half smiled and pointed his hand to the chair. "I know you will quite enjoy the taste of Colombian dark roast." Borges sat down and leaned slightly backwards without releasing his cane. "Do you know the biggest advantage of being blind?" he asked and answered immediately. "Blind don't need light, so my utility bills are way lower." He laughed at his own joke, only to be interrupted by his assistant, carrying a tray of aromatic coffee poured in 2 small porcelain cups. Amazing how the very idea of drinking coffee instantly changes your mood before you even take your first sip. As I was readying to go on a pre-scripted monologue of expressing my gratitude and honor, Borges jumped right into the action. "I will get right to it, Senator Navarro, about you being here and about me remembering you. I know you have many questions. I will attempt to answer some, but not all. When you leave this hotel, there will still be some questions that you will have to find answers to, on your own." He gently picked his cup of coffee and with hand somewhat shaking, took an artistic sip. Yes, I had questions. So many that my brain membranes were buzzing in bewilderment and disbelief. Here I was, sitting in the room with one of the greatest writers, who happened to mysteriously know my name, and "Have you by any chance read The Book of Imaginary Beings?" asked Borges. "I have, many times. I read it in Spanish when it just came out. Very recently I bought the English translation in some shabby bookstore off Oxford Circus. I read that book far too many times, but never in its entirety, mostly starting on a random page, just as Borges had intended it to be consumed by his readers. You see, Senator Navarro, that book was, and perhaps still is, a never-ending work in progress, as human imagination has no boundaries. I have included what I had researched over 10 years ago, then recently expanded and republished with more figments of collective human imagination. But the book is merely a small subset. In a way, the book writes itself. In some form, it's a labyrinth, an endless one, a living one, where every corridor and every room is never the same. What I had always wanted is the book to reflect the labyrinth in our collective subconsciousness, the force that drives our minds to craft. For that reason, all the creatures in my book are strictly fictional. Mythical. Am I not boring you? Not at all. I understand Senator Borges. He nodded and wiped a coffee grind off his nose. That book, as its title implies, is all about imaginary beings. Tales, legends, folklore. But one thing that no one knows is that I had originally intended this book to include one more being, a being that goes by its Latin name Quietus est. It appeared and disappeared across many cultures, sometimes centuries apart. Very little is known of it, but what I found was indeed astonishing. First, this being is physically no different than an ordinary human. You may say it is human in many ways. As I studied this entity, I became more and more agitated. I could not stop. Like a madman, I was trying to learn more and more, but very soon the excitement turned into another feeling. Fear. Fear of what, Senor Borges? Borges' eyesight shifted from the corner of the room straight on me, as if he could perfectly see me. Fear of what I had uncovered, that Quietus EST is not a myth at all. He attempted to take another sip, but his hands started shaking, so he had to put the cup down, spilling some of it on the saucer and around the table. Pardon me, young man, I am trying to maintain composure. But you have not tried the coffee, he said, wiping his mouth and forehead with a knitted handkerchief. I raised the small cup and took a sip, disregarding the aromatic fumes of Colombian beans drifting down my internal gorges. Pardon me, sir, but you are saying that the imaginary being called Quietus EST was not imaginary. Is that why you decided not to include him in your book of imaginary beings? Only in part. Fear came from the realization of what it would mean for mankind to know about its existence. You see, it's no secret that we are all well aware of our eventual demise. We all die. But imagine what would happen if we all stared right into the face of death every single day of our lives and knew the time that was left for us in this world. Death, not as a vague concept portrayed by middle-aged artists, not as a folklore tale of a grim reaper, but as a real living entity that stalks you and walks around showing you a ticking clock counting down minutes and seconds, getting closer to you with every second, trying to grab your hand. Running from death is worse than death itself. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. But I shall talk no more. Allow me to give you my scribbles from years ago. These are unedited in their raw format, so please pardon the poor language. It's right there in the drawer. You will find a folder with a yellow piece of paper. Read it aloud while my ripe old body attempts to catch a breath. I opened the drawer, as he instructed, and found a yellow piece of cursive handwritings carved in Spanish with some Latin phrases. The scribbles were short, less than a page long, with marks and scratches, but most of this was very much decipherable. He must have written this himself half blind, I thought. What caused him to do that and not dictate to his assistant? I unfolded the paper and began reading. Quietus EST. It is said that one shall not know about its own ways and times of demise. The imminent passing is only felt by those that are either terminally ill, and even so, they don't possess the knowledge of when and where, or by death row inmates awaiting the exact day and time of their execution. Lack of such knowledge coerces us to exist. Sumerians believed in a certain deity. The word deity was scratched and replaced with demon of death embodied in human flesh and bones, which again was scratched and replaced with entity, whose sole role was to stalk its victims and inform them of how much time they have left to live. Per the ancient Book of Dead, which was discovered as a set of clay tablets, typically buried in corpses, only those that are luminous can see the deity again crossed out twice, replaced with demon, then with entity. The luminous ones are thought to be either people with high spiritual powers or vice versa, the cursed ones condemned by priests. The reference briefly reappears in some Egyptian manuscripts, but in later writings is replaced by Anubis, or in rare occurrences by Horus. The writings again depict this unnamed being as an eternal human who never sleeps, but always wanders. What's strange is that neither Sumerians nor Egyptians ever gave the entity a discrete name. However, the latter rare findings during Dark Ages refer to him as Quietus EST. The only depiction of Quietus EST was that of an ordinary human standing next to a sun clock, which was used to measure the time that the Chosen One had left to live. From time to time, Quietus EST stalks the Chosen One, and when cornered, moves hands of the clock forward to shorten the lifetime. If the Chosen One cannot escape, then his time eventually runs out. The very last reference was found in... Enough, Mr. Navarro. You understand the idea. Now on to the main question. Why are you here? He drew closer, and a dull shadow from a lamp cut right through his elongated forehead. Quietus EST is an eternal wanderer who is always with us, the timekeeper who sits at the edge of the stage with a ticking watch on his wrist. The greatest gift given to mankind is its inability to see him. When I lost sight, I thought blindness was a blessing in disguise. But one does not require eyes to see the wanderer. What eyes cannot see, ears can hear, and skin can feel. I hear him. I feel him. You are here, Mr. Navarro, because you and I are the luminous ones. Borges paused and asked me with a trembling voice, Mr. Navarro, you saw him too, didn't you? Cold shivers that have been accumulating in my lower back rushed up my spinal cord in millions of explosions. Nausea formed a massive ball of air in my throat, and for a moment I struggled to breathe. Desperately trying to cease the thumping inside, I pushed words out. I saw him today. How do you get used to the notion of being a passerby on this earth? Ordinary humans do not have to get used to that. We have that built-in protection layer, that safety cork in our brain membranes that separates the realization of being mortal from flooding down upon us. It allows us to breathe the air. It lets us exhibit this extraordinary, yet sacred carelessness. The mental block that denies the laws of life on a primitive emotional level, even for the keenest scholars. The indecipherable tetragrammaton is shown to us in every step we take, in every cup of Colombian coffee we sip, in every word of wisdom that we collect from books. Every second we bypass the sinister tick-tock and hear the name of the God being whispered into our ears. And yet we humans turn around and whistle, shame, shame, deceiving our own self-cognizance. And that, as Senator Borges called it, is the true blessing. Those who possess the name of the divine being are doomed. Knowledge is madness. Knowledge is inexistence. Knowledge of death is worse than death. We sat in his hotel room until early morning, the two luminous and doomed souls. Our casual exchange of words was amplified by the ticking of the clock. It was dawn when I noticed Borges nodding in his sleep. His left hand was still resting on the cane, and his pupils were shuffling behind shut eyelids. Borges was dreaming. So must have I. As I was exiting the foyer of the hotel, I hid behind the column and looked around the street. It was empty. Bleak light of street lamps drew strange crossbeams on pavements. Early October leaves were drawing in closed circles like witches around the fire. I was looking around, hoping to not see him. He wasn't there, but he was. I felt his presence not very far from me. Muscat orchards, they resonate inside like echoes of a guitar string heard from a deep alcove, but nothing particular comes to mind. I am trying to shift focus from one object to another, but my nomad memory is lost in endless labyrinths. You took my memories away from me, didn't you? Wait, mortal. Wait 5 more minutes, and you will know the answer. I hear in my brain. He is talking to me now. I can see how the long uphill walk is wearing him out. But what are pain and tiredness when you're crossing the finish line? As Borges warned me, do not ever come close to him. Do not look him straight in the eyes. He will always be near. His watch will be ticking. If he attempts to catch on, run. But he will forever follow. In a way, he will be like a shadow of you. And I ran, and he wandered. I evaded. He followed. He came too close to me in my hotel room on the second day after my long night in Borges' quarters. The fool in me still thought that escaping from him would be as easy as moving into a new flat, or checking into a hotel, so I did just that. There was some shabby hotel minutes from my work where I decided to spend a few nights just to think things through. That evening, and I remember every minute of it, was my first face-to-face encounter with him. My room, B6, was on the basement level. As I stumbled through the dark hotel corridor, trying to find the key to my room, I felt his presence, but my ignorant foolishness dismissed all mental warnings and turned the keys. As the door hinge squeaked, I took my first step into the hotel room. A street-level window was casting 2 thick yellow streaks of light on the floor carpet. I smelled dust and spider webs. He was in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed with a rope in his hand. A thin white blanket was covering his head like a shroud around a statue. I stood in a stupor like a paralyzed insect. An avalanche of sweat gushed from every pore of my body. With hand twisted behind my back, I was feverishly trying to twist the doorknob. He got up from the bed with a groan. He took a step towards me. Hand too sweaty to turn the knob. Open it. Open. He grabbed my wrist. Open. Run. The stretched corridor of the hotel basement flashed like random shots of a silent movie. Run. B5. B2. B1. Run. Staircase. Up. Exit. Run. Your time is coming. Fernandez Augustin Navarro. A whisper crawled into my ears. Coming, coming, hissed the wind. I ran until my legs gave in. I fell down somewhere in the outskirts of the town, passing out in an alley amidst rubbish until sunup. My madness has begun. In the days following my first face-to-face encounter with Quietus EST, I've moved out of my London flat. I had some savings, enough to tramp town to town, continent to continent, doing temp jobs here and there, sometimes sleeping on streets. He was right behind me. Even if I didn't see him for a month, I knew he would soon catch on. It would be only a matter of time for him to pop up somewhere. On the opposite side of the street, in the next car, over on the subway, or madly prying through shutters of windows in the house across. My attempts to speak to Borges were futile. How does the blind master live with this curse, I wondered. How does he manage to evade his sinister follower? I had questions, far more than I had anticipated, but Sinner Borges was already on the other side of the globe. I wrote him letters. He never replied. I tried calling hotels where he stayed. Unavailable. The books that he wrote, I bought all of them in attempts to find hidden meanings. What if he had secret messages for me inside his writings? The Book of Sand, Dr. Brody's report. I even searched his earlier writings, analyzed every word. Pointless. Futile. Until 1983, Shakespeare's Memory, his final book, as it turned out to be. I was somewhere in Eastern Europe when I bought the book. Immediately, I began my scrupulous study, letter by letter, page by page, analyzing every space and every punctuation sign. And that's when I found it, the answer. The answer was the story itself, the story that did not require much study or decryption. All I had to do was read it. I knew I had to come face to face with Quietus EST like Borges did, but not before having to go through the life of an exile. That's what Borges had intended me to do. Such was his final and only message to me embodied within his last story. A story written for the public, but intended for my eyes only. The story was that the protagonist receives memories of Shakespeare, memories that overwhelm him, overpowering his own. He forgets modern-day cars and engines, instead remembering faces and names from some distant past, memories he has never known, memories that belong to another man. In a way, he will be like a shadow of you, Borges told me that night. Slowly but surely, my shadow was becoming me. That's why I can only vaguely remember you, my childhood home. Him or me, no more running. It ends here. Few more minutes, I say to myself as I look at the watch. There he is. He is out of breath, beaten, tired, and bent by the weight of his own arid body. One last push, old man, and we will meet. I am hiding behind the rock. His footsteps on gravel and sand, I can tell them from any other footsteps in the world. His breathing, wheezing, and crackling. I am counting to 5. He knows where I am, but he is too tired to take that last step. Let me take that step for you. I am staring at his face, wrinkled like leaves of an ancient scroll. Time's up, Quietus EST, I am telling him. He is not fighting back, and my Swiss blade finds a comfy spot below his Adam's apple. I am going to finish him now. Popping sounds are coming out from his flabby throat. What are you trying to tell me, old man? Let me hear your last words. I am easing the pressure to let him talk. But the sounds that come out not words, but laughter. You are confused, he says. You've got it all wrong. Let me help you understand. I am letting him sit up. He is coughing blood. One wrong move and he's dead. He wipes the blood off his lips and nods in understanding. All my life I have followed you, he begins slowly. It's a miracle I have come this far and lived this long. Ever since I left Cordoba, I was a ticking time bomb. I was diagnosed as suicidal. Doctor after doctor, therapies, specialists' prescription, yoga, I have tried them all. Some helped for a while, and the disease subsided, but then trolled back with a new, stronger wave. It's this disease that nests here, and he points to his head, forcing me to look for a way to end my own life. It all began in London, on that morning when I was sitting on the bench in the middle of that square, feeling the disease gnawing on my brain. My first attempt was in that hotel, room B6. I sat on the bed in that dark room for hours with a rope in my hand and a blanket over my head. Death opened the door and stood above me in the darkness of the room. Oh, how I wanted my pain to end. But it was not meant to be. Not then, not there. I had to live on. Ever since that day, it was a cat and a mouse game between us. I chased death, and death would always slip away, until now. He pauses, rubbing his flabby neck, then points his finger down the valley and continues. I was born in that house. I remember every moment of my childhood. My parents, my toys, my school. I remember playing hide and seek with my cousins in Muscat Gardens and dozing off to Sunday clergy in that white chapel. I remember Eastern rugs being washed on the street and the smell of grapes. My name is Fernandez August Navarro, and you have no true name, but they call you Quietus EST, the one who wanders. Filaments of scorching infernos have been ignited all over me. The fire sets off inside my eyelids, spreading over to all facial pores and trickling down my body. Lies! Imbecile lies! I roar. Look at me, he says. I am an old man. And you? Still young and strong as you will always be. You have not aged. Now think more. What do you remember of your childhood? Shakespearean memories of random sounds and smells are all you have gained from me. Master Borges knew who you were. He cracked you, and then he tricked you. He made you think you were me. That was his way of evading you by not revealing you the truth until his final breath, final book, final story. You are the one who wanders, and those memories you have, those are my memories. And now that I have told you who you really are, you must finally finish me. I have heard enough of his fibs. I am throwing my knife away. I shall not require any blades to finish him. With hands clenched around his thin neck, I am strangling him. I hear him squeal as the grip tightens. I feel the crackling of neck bones between my thumbs. I see him gulping the air in warm convulsions. He looks peaceful. I sit on his chest and watch his last breath, picked up by the wind, carried down the valley to the gardens, passing by the white chapel and the house where he grew up. The scorching wind of Andalusia is pouring sunlight onto his face, toying with eyelashes, pounding on cheeks, and drilling through hair. He must have missed the smell of the valley and the ripening softness of muscat fluff glistening in the air. I am rewinding my wristwatch and walking downhill along the wavy trail, my thumbs still sore from killing. I am taking small steps sideways. Once I reach El Jardinito Road, I will hop on the first bus, and from there I will travel west or north. Destination will never matter. Anywhere is where the roads take me. Me, the one who wanders. The first story. Your brother built a sex bot. What? He built a sex bot, Andrew, my mom said through a waterfall of tears. He built a sex bot, and now he's up in his room being intimate with it. Dad stormed into the lounge yelling, "Didn't I say you were coddling the boy? How many times? But you just had to let him sit on his arse playing Pokemons all day. Well, congratulations. Now he's fucking one of them." Gary and I had always been close, so my parents' first instinct had been to call me. As kids, we'd spent our weekends and summers climbing trees and competing over the Mario Kart Championship, a belt we made out of glue, cardboard, and some spare glitter. Unfortunately, the 6-year age gap meant I could never help him with his social issues. He changed schools 3 times, mostly because of bullies, and by the tender age of 23, he'd never once been on a date. He lived with our parents in their 3-bedroom house where he barricaded himself in his room, detached from reality. 20 head-scratching minutes later, I'd come no closer to getting a grasp on the situation. I went upstairs. Behind a door covered in Doctor Who posters, Gary was at his desk, surrounded by anime figurines. Although we both had our mother's dirty blonde hair and dimples, he stood a head taller. He carried a little extra weight, although the bulk underneath gave him the appearance of an ex-rugby player. I said, "All right, what the hell's going on?" A soft 2-note chime rang out. Resting on the desk, there was a heart-shaped box, roughly the size of my closed fist. Gary scooped it up and sighed. Mom was cleaning my room earlier, and she found this. The heart opened up like a music box. Inside there were 2 screens, one on each compartment, and from the top, half a lady pretty enough to win 1,000,000 beauty contests waved at me. "Oh my gosh, you must be Andrew," she said, fists trembling with excitement. "Gary's told me so much about you." Visible from the chest up and silhouetted against a pink background, she had an oval face, wide cheekbones, and chestnut hair. "Andrew, this is Valerie, my girlfriend." "I can't believe we're finally meeting in the flesh," the virtual avatar said. "Or, I mean, not flesh. I mean, you know what I mean. God, this is so exciting." "She's an AI virtual chatbot." "I prefer the term digividual," she said. "Sorry, babe, digividual. We're dating." "Are you taking the mic?" I asked. "Taking the mic?" the virtual lady replied. Gary rotated the screen towards him. "It means playing a joke, babe." "Aw, thanks, babe. No, you're not. No, he's not Andrew." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep a nasty migraine from setting in. For the love of all that is holy, start at the beginning. Somehow my brother had landed himself a role as a product tester for a product named Valent AI Knee. I asked if I could see the device, which had some real heft to it. I remember thinking you'd break a few toes if it dropped on your foot. As Gary described Valerie's quirks and mannerisms, his face lit up, and he seemed happy, genuinely happy, possibly for the first time since we were young. He showed off all the different features, like augmenting Val into a video feed of himself, so it looked like they were cuddling or blowing on the bottom screen to ruffle her hair. "So what do you think?" Valerie asked. "Are we cute or are we cute?" After a long pause, I said, I'm going to go check Dad hasn't had a stroke. In the lounge, my parents were on their second bottle of wine. I'm going to beat that moron over the head with that thing, Dad sneered. I pulled out my phone. There were articles online about people in relationships with AI companions, mostly in Japan, although zero scientific studies had been done on the phenomenon. The manufacturers didn't list the product on their website, although their socials hinted at a top-secret product set to launch later this year. I said, I know this is strange, but at least he's not getting catfished by some 300 lb dude from Australia. How about we book an appointment with that therapist he used to see? You two do what you like, Dad snapped. I'm washing my hands of this shit. As it turned out, Gary's former therapist wouldn't meet with him unless he voluntarily engaged with her, which he refused to do. 6 more mental health professionals said the same thing. Get him on board or we'd just be wasting everybody's time. The next time Gary visited my place for a Smash Bros session, I said, So Mom tells me you're staying up late these days. Yeah, Val gets anxious sometimes. If she can't sleep, we chat until she feels better. She gets anxious. From the armrest, his computer-generated girlfriend said, Of course. Doesn't everybody? The two of them had become a regular package deal, quickly developing an aggressively private way of interacting. Their language was coded in inside jokes and nicknames. Now and again, Val would say a word like frisbee or jamble. Then they'd both get set giggling. To Gary, I said, But why stay up? Couldn't she wait until morning? I mean, she isn't real. Gary paused the game. So now you're going to make fun of me too? It's not bad enough Dad keeps acting like a dick. Judging by his expression, he was genuinely hurt by my remark. You're right. Forget I said anything. Val's great. Don't tell me, tell her. My eyes flicked between the pair. Ooh, you're pretty great, Val. Damn right. Next time I invited him over, he said, I don't know, Val got pretty bored last time. Why don't we try a calligraphy? She's great at calligraphy. In the weeks that followed, Gary seemed to adopt whatever hobbies his girlfriend suggested. He also went without a haircut, and according to Mom, slid from reeking of stale sweat to an open-air fish market on the hottest day of the year. As for Dad, if anybody asked, he only had one son. But when Mom's 60th birthday rolled around as a gift, she requested the entire family go to her favorite restaurant, Marconi's Bar and Grill. As we browsed our menus in a corner booth, that 2-note chime rang out. Then Gary flicked open the gadget and conversed with Val, oblivious to our parents' death glares. Babe, I'm thinking about trying the sirloin. Nah, have the pan-roasted chicken supreme, babe. Ah, good call. To his credit, Dad's temper didn't boil over until later when the waiter arrived carrying the cake, singing happy birthday. As the rest of us took up the chant, Mom's face turned beetroot. She blew out the candles, everyone clapped, then Dad handed the waiter his phone and asked him to take a picture. Wait, Gary said, opening the heart. Gary, Dad said, in a firm tone that conveyed annoyance, put the toy away. Valerie's not a toy, he answered, his expression darkening. Sensing Mom's special night was in jeopardy, I said, Dad, it's okay, we can. You've got 5 seconds, Gary. 4. The waiter's eyes shifted between us. I can come back later. 3. Why do you always have to put him down like that? All eyes settled on the virtual avatar. Excuse me. I'm just going to say it. You're a terrible father. Let me tell you something if you think. Dad shook himself alert. Why the fuck am I arguing with a Nintendo? His hand reached for Val, but Gary snatched the heart away and held our father at arm's length. Plates and cutlery got knocked off the table and clattered against the floor as they jostled around. Then around the restaurant conversations tapered off as heads swiveled in our direction. Before their scuffle could escalate any further, Mom threw down her napkin and marched toward the exit, mortified. Look what you did, you little shit, Dad fumed as he hurried off after her. To the bemused waiter I said, Can we just have the check, please? I'm such a loser, I fuck everything up, Gary said in the passenger's side of my car. Perched on the dashboard, Val said, No, you're not Babe. That was all your dad's fault. Right, Andrew? Can you pause that thing for a sec? I asked Gary. Why? He protested. Anything you want to say to me, you can say to Val. Just turn it off. I reached out, but Gary pulled on my wrist so hard the car veered onto the far side of the road. Then a set of headlights came rolling toward us. At the very last second, I shifted back into the correct lane. Sitting across from me, his hulking frame seemed to fill the cabin. I became painfully aware of the fact I hadn't been able to out-wrestle him since he hit that growth spurt at age 12, but I told myself he'd never hurt me, that we had too strong a connection. Even still, it was an uncomfortable rest of the ride to our parents' house. From that day forward, Gary went days at a time without speaking to anybody who didn't need a power adapter, and he became our town's walking punchline when some local teens realized he wasn't having a picnic with a real-life girlfriend over video chat, but rather an electronic character. Terrified where all this might lead, I did my best to contact Val's manufacturers, who surprise, foisted me off to an AI response bot. I was scared for my brother or my parents. Then last week, he turned up at my door late one night, Val in hand. "Bro, can we come in? It's really important." I could tell he'd been crying. I brought him through to the lounge. As a jittery Gary set his girlfriend on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, I noticed the knuckles on his right hand looked all bruised and swollen. "What the hell happened?" "I don't know. It all happened so fast." He rubbed his hands together, pacing back and forth. "Gary was incredible," Valerie said. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Start at the beginning." He shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Okay, so I wanted to buy a leather jacket for Val, but I don't have any money left, so I borrowed Dad's credit card. It was only going to be until payday. Then I'd make him square, but he woke up and turned into a complete psycho." "A leather jacket? Gary, Val's an AI." His jaw clenched. So quickly I said, "I mean she's a digividual. How would you buy her a jacket?" "Show him, babe." With a flash of blue light, Val changed into a leather jacket and a choke chain. My eyes whipped between him and the avatar. "You can buy her shit?" His eyes practically sparkled as he said, "They launched an e-store." On screen, Val changed outfits with a series of flashes. There was a sundress, a swimsuit, and a crop top, each obscured by a giant padlock. "Show him what I got you for Christmas," he said, his voice breaking a little. He sounded anxious. Another flash, then sparkling diamonds trailed from the avatar's ears. "Wait, you're telling me you're spaffing money up the wall on that thing?" As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. "You brother's gone mad. I'm at the hospital now with your father. He's breathing through a bloody respirator. They can't get him to wake up." "What hospital? What are you talking about?" "Gary attacked him. 16 broken bones he's got. Now wait, the surgeon needs to speak with me." "Hello? Mom?" I looked at Gary. "You put Dad in the fucking R?" "He attacked me," Valerie said from the mantelpiece. Gary nodded. "It's true. He tried to kill her. You've got to help us. The police, they won't understand." "Kill her? Almost against my own will?" I started laughing. "Okay, this has gone too far." As my arm reached out, Gary's clamped the wrist, his expression suddenly darkening. "Leave Val alone." Softening my voice, I said, "Why not let her have a little snooze while we straighten this mess out?" With a stiff shove, he sent me careening back. "You just want to shut her down, don't you? Let me guess. Dad put you up to this." "Put me up to what?" "Don't act all innocent. You hate Val, don't you?" "Hate her?" I choked out a laugh. The rage had been bubbling up inside me for months. Now it erupted. "How could I hate her? She's a fucking video game." "I knew it. You and Dad, you're in this together. You're trying to get rid of her. She's all I've got, and you're trying to get rid of her." He stepped forward, solid and imposing. For a moment we faced each other in absolute silence. A showdown. Then Valerie screamed, "Kick his ass, babe." In a wild fury, Gary lashed out. His fists connected with my jaw, my forehead, my neck. I answered every shot as best I could, but it quickly became obvious he had the advantage. He threw himself at me, then we went round and round before he drove me backwards, my head thudding against the wall. The room and everything in it blurred, and when my vision settled, 2 bulky hands had clamped shut around my windpipe tight. Pressure started building inside my skull, and I couldn't push off the wall. There was enough venom in my brother's expression that I could tell he wasn't going to release me, no matter what. "On my right," Val screamed, "kill him, babe." My hand rose to the mantelpiece and Spider walked along, stretching as far as it could go. The fingertips brushed along the edge of the heart, which inched closer and closer, and when my hand grabbed hold of what it sought, I brought it down across Gary's right temple in a fierce arc. I remember thinking dropping the device on your foot would break a few toes. Turned out it was also enough to give a full-grown man-child a full-on concussion. My baby brother collapsed on the floor in a staggered heap, letting me draw some air. Gary, a fractured Val, squealed as she fell from my hand and thumped to the rug. A few good stomps later, and my brother officially became single once again. Our scuffle left the idiot with 6 stitches plus a one-way ticket to the psych ward. Dad needed to have the bones in his leg reset and won't be able to eat solid foods anytime soon. Over the course of these past few days, we found out that in the space of 4 months, Gary squandered $5,000 on virtual gifts, clothes, and accessories for Valerie. Valent AI need called the codependency he developed with their virtual chatbot impossible and threatened legal action for even implying she encouraged Gary to kill me. So far as I can tell, they're going ahead with their product launch later this year. Second story. I can't explain it, but the butterflies seem to know where the bodies are. I've been a park ranger since I was 18, and after 5 years, I really can't imagine doing anything else. I was in the Scouts when I was younger, and I've been an avid hiker all my life. Time spent in the woods is time well spent, and the ability to work there every day is honestly a dream come true. Being a park ranger, you see your fair share of bodies in the woods. People come out here to hike and swim and forget that there are things here that will kill you. They run afoul of animals, they get sucked under in the rapids, they don't pack enough food or water, or they just get lost and aren't found till someone chances upon them. Spring 2023 was the year that we got some help from the butterflies. It started with the death of Angel Myers, but it certainly didn't end there. Angel Myers was what you would call a minimalistic camper. She would come in with a few essentials and a blanket, just kind of camp wherever she decided to drop down. She knew which plants would kill her and which ones would nourish her, which was good. She also knew which plants would get her higher than airplane wings, which was bad. We had called the police on Angel several times, but they always cut her loose after a few months, and the rangers refused to toss her a lifetime ban from the park, so she just kept coming back. When a pair of hikers told us they had found a body in an area we knew as the meadow, we supposed this would be the last time we called the police for her. She was naked, and it wasn't the first time any of us had seen her in this state. She wasn't bad to look at, but it was always a little weird to find someone stark naked in the elements. She was splayed out, spread eagle, in the flowers that grew in the meadows, and her eyes and tongue were missing. That wasn't terribly uncommon either, not with all the varmints in the park, but the little black growths on her skin were definitely something I had never seen before. She had 3 rows of perfect little spikes, each of them about 3 inches long, and each line about 9 spikes long. Other than the spikes, the strangest part of the whole scene were the butterflies. They were not a species I was familiar with, and they were bone white with light black patterns on the wings. They were thick over the body, and I assumed they had been what had drawn the hikers. They were circling in a thick cloud, the whites easily seen against the green canopy around them, and I was as amazed by them as I was the weird protrusions on her skin. "What the hell are these?" I asked, reaching out a finger to test if they were sharp, but finding them squishy and full of green liquid. "Pallidamores," said Rico, one of the rangers who worked with me. "One more time in English for the rest of us," I said. "Pale death," he said, pointing to the butterflies. "They're rare. I don't think I've seen one in the flesh. They're supposed to live in the deep woods, and they only come out once every few years to lay eggs." I pointed to the little row of black spikes running up her thigh on corpses. Rico nodded. "That's why they call them pallidamores. They lay their eggs on corpses, though it's usually of animals. I have heard of them laying eggs on human bodies, but it's rare. I guess they found the corpse before we did." The hikers said the same when we questioned them. They had been hiking to the meadow, his fiancée wanting to see it in spring, and as they came to the end of the trail, she had noticed the swarm of pale butterflies and wanted a closer look. She had thought they were so pretty, but as they came closer, they had seen the body and realized what they were swarming around it. We called the station and got some guys from the coroner's office down to pick her up. We hoped she would somehow be the last body we found that spring, but I think even then I knew this wouldn't be the last body I saw taken from the park that year. The next one was a hiker named Marcus Dre, and his death was truly terrible. Some campers had gone fishing in the Conusquat River, the waterway that runs through the park, and as they chased the trout who were beginning their journey to the spawning grounds, one of their kids came across a grisly sight. He said it looked like a scaled claw was sticking out of the river, and he ran to get his mother, thinking it was a monster. She had expected a rock formation, or maybe a stick with some moss on it, but what they found was an arm covered in the black spike pods the butterflies left behind. "They looked like scales," the mother had said. still a little shaken by the experience, and I could understand why he thought it was a monster hand. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it was an arm jutting up from the foam. At first, we thought the guy had just fallen into the river and gotten stuck between the rocks after drowning. When we pulled him out, however, we got a better idea of the extent of the damage. Something forced him into the small space between the two rocks, and they hadn't done it gently. His shoulders were broken, like snapped in the middle and just folded up. He was crumpled up like a suit coat in the hole, and that wasn't all. Something had eaten his face. Not like Angel, where her eyes and tongue were missing. They had eaten his entire face off, down to the skull, and there was nothing left but ragged flesh and scored white bone. If it hadn't been for the arm sticking up, we might have never found him until someone panning for minerals found a finger or a skull. The butterflies, the pale death, presided over the whole thing as we managed to get him onto the shore. After that, we found 4 more bodies in a month. One was left on a mountainside, its hands missing, and its nose and lips chewed off. He had been climbing the low-grade mountain we have on the grounds, and when he'd gone missing, we thought it might be a small avalanche due to snow melt. When a fisherman found him laid out on the lowest peak of the mountain, however, we knew it was something much worse. The second was a woman who'd gone into the woods to relieve herself during a picnic, and was found in the low branches of a tree. Well, half of her was. The other half was high up in the tree, and something had eaten her legs. The husband had to be hospitalized after he identified the top half of his wife, and I felt bad for her kids. They had been here to enjoy a picnic in the park, and something had taken that away from them. The third was, unfortunately, a child named Kaitlyn Mills. Kaitlyn would have been 6 in July, but she never got the opportunity. Kaitlyn was the strangest and also the easiest to identify. Kaitlyn had left her parents' campsite in the night, but it appeared that whatever had found her had taken an interest in her. Something had taken care of her in the woods. Something had fed her. Something had changed her clothes. Something had made sure she drank clean water. And then, unfortunately, its care had lapsed. Kaitlyn hadn't died because her face had been eaten off. She had died because her skull had connected with the ground and cracked. It was pretty clear she had fallen out of a tree, but the coroner said she would have needed to fall from a pretty steep height. She was stretched out, too, as if something had made her comfortable as she lay dying. The fourth was the worst, and the reason for what came after. The fourth was Ranger Franklin Carpenter, and he had gone missing after going to check one of the pump stations. We had 6 pump stations, things we used to bring clean water to the campgrounds, and he had been responding to a call about a malfunction in Station 4. He had gone out before lunch, and we found what was left of him the next day after he never came back. If he hadn't died wearing his name tag, then we wouldn't have known who it was. His arms and legs were missing and believed to have been eaten. His face was gone, as was the top of his skull and what lay within. Something had gnawed his chest, eaten his buttocks, and chewed his genitals off for good measure. He was just a torso and part of a head when we found him on the edge of the woods, and a lot of us got pretty scared after losing one of our own like that. Over all 4 bodies, the butterflies held sway, and their eggs were in evidence. I expected a visit from the head ranger, but when he arrived with a man in a dark suit the next day, we should have known something was about to happen. He had a few other men in similar attire, and Rico lifted an eyebrow as we took our seats at briefing. None of these guys were dressed for more than a slow stroll over concrete paths, but I doubted that was their intention. Agent Lee has been gracious enough to come and help us with our little problem. We will be splitting all of you into groups so you can canvass the woods. We need to find whatever is doing this before summer starts, especially with one of our own being a recent casualty. We have a lot of ground to cover, so Rangers will be splitting off with 2 of Agent Lee's boys to show them the trails and help them bring this to a close. So that's how I found myself in the woods with Agents Feast and Agent Martin. Agent Lee might have looked like an investment banker, but these 2 had traded their Brooks Brothers suits for camo and assault rifles. We had broken out the shotguns that we used for putting off angry wildlife to supplement the firepower the agents had brought, and the 3 of us proceeded through the woods. Agent Feast wasn't a big talker, but Agent Martin made up for it by asking questions about what we had seen. I told him about the bodies, the parts that had been eaten, and the butterflies that seemed to hover around everything. Butterflies, Feast said, and it was probably the only thing I had heard him say in the hour we had been walking. Yeah, Rico calls them something in Latin that basically means pale death. They show up around the bodies and just kind of mark where they are. Feast gave Martin a look, and the 2 nodded knowingly. Have you seen anything near the sites? Footprints or scales, maybe? Stuff like insect skin? I shook my head. No, mostly just dead people. I was preparing to ask them what they thought we were looking for, since they clearly knew something, when we came through a dense stand of trees and into an open space that was anything but open. It seemed invested with the pale butterflies, and as we stalked in, they fluttered around us almost gladly. The two agents took this as a good sign, but I wasn't sure what to think. These things had been a pretty foul omen in the last few months, and finding a huge number of them now seemed less than ideal. As we moved into the cloud of butterflies, it also seemed like something was stalking us. Through the thick wave of insects, there was a large shadow that stalked us. It almost appeared human-sized, but the longer I watched it flit through the swarm, it seemed to grow. It may have had as few as 2 arms or as many as 8, but the wings I saw stir its smaller kin were what worried me. They were tall and white, just like the others, and it seemed to be using them as a blind as it lured us deeper. "It's close," Martin whispered. "Steady," Feast said. "If we spook him, he might fly away before we can take him out." "What?" I half whispered, talking too loud, but too scared to care. Feast looked at Martin, shrugging at something in the other's face. "You've heard of the Mothman? Well, there are counterparts to that thing. The people of Joplin talk about how many of their children were saved from a tornado by these butterfly people, but they assumed those who were lost were taken by said tornado, and not the same creatures who saved them. We call them Lycaenidae bipedus, and they are extremely—" but he never got to finish. Suddenly the cloud of butterflies enveloped us, their small bodies clinging to us as they struck. Our vision was cut off, and as the automatic weapon chattered, I hit my belly and started crawling. I wanted to get out of the swarm, to get away from the wild bark of the gun, and as I crawled, I heard people yelling. The wet sound of something being torn cut off some of the screaming, but the gunfire persisted as I kept making my way out of the cloud of insects. I kept crawling until I made it out of the clearing, and once I was no longer being buffeted by butterflies, I got up and started running. I could still hear the gunfire behind me, but I knew that what I wanted was to live. I knew that if I stayed, I'd be dead, and I still very much wanted to live. I ran until someone yelled at me to stop and shoved a gun in my face. It was another one of the agents, and as they all coalesced, I was ordered to take them back to the spot where I had left Agent Feast. As little as I wanted to go back, I agreed. By the time I found it again, Feast was sitting on something he had covered with a tarp. Feast's left arm was hanging uselessly at his side. His clothes were ripped to shreds, but he was grinning like a big game hunter who's bagged the big one. "Get it to the truck. Tell the boys back at base I had no choice but to kill it." It refused to come peacefully and forced my hand. Martin was dead, his body covered in a slew of crushed butterflies. I saw him before they could tarp him as well. Something had torn his throat out, and I assumed it was whatever was under the big tarp that Feast was guarding. They took both the tarped bodies away, and when Feast came towards me, I was worried he would be angry that I had fled. He put a hand on my shoulder instead and nodded in understanding. "Don't feel bad, kid. I would have run too if I'd had the choice. Both Agent Martin and I knew what we were getting into. You got us here. That's what counts." They took it away, and the murders stopped. We lost 2 more hikers that year, but they were both killed by the elements. The butterflies left that same day, never hopefully to return. I can't help but think about that spring again as winter abates and the season gets warmer. I tell you one thing, I'll be keeping an eye peeled for butterflies from now on. Third story. I was in a very abusive relationship from the first year of high school all the way to my last year of university. We had known each other since elementary school, and our families were also close. She was very kind at the beginning. However, as time went on, things began to get very scary. The abuse started off with little things. She would insult and berate me for nothing, and she began smacking me when she thought I did something stupid. It got much worse every year we were together. It was both physical and psychological. The tactics she would utilize in order to prevent me from leaving her were various and relentless. She threatened to kill herself if I left her, or hurt me or someone in my family. She used to tell me if I called the police on her, she would stab herself and tell them I did it. For the record, throughout our whole relationship, I had never laid a finger on her. I always tried my best to de-escalate the tense situations. Looking back now, putting up with that sort of behavior was definitely something which kept me trapped in that situation. When she wasn't hitting me or insulting me, she would sit on the couch for hours on end, scratching and picking at her scalp, pulling bits of her hair out in the process. I'd find strands of her hair all over the apartment, sometimes with drops of blood near them. I truly believe she had some sort of undiagnosed mental illness. I tried to get her help many times, but she would never accept it. Even though she treated me horribly, a part of me still loved her and wanted to help her. When men are in abusive relationships, I think many of us are ashamed or scared to tell people. Either we fear we'll be perceived as weak, or we fear we won't be believed at all. But it's important to remember that anyone can be the victim of an abusive partner. It's crucial to leave them immediately. Tell your loved ones and go to the authorities. If you don't, you'll risk being in a situation like I was. It will only get worse. At the time, I felt as though there was nothing I could do to get out of that situation. I genuinely felt fear for my life and the lives of my family. I stayed awake for nights on end because I was afraid she would kill me in my sleep. But eventually, I got desperate. I decided to hire a private investigator to collect information on her and help document the abuse she put me through on a daily basis. I hid cameras in our apartment, recorded our conversations, and took pictures of the cuts and bruises she would inflict onto me. Eventually, we gathered enough evidence to build a solid case against her. My intention was to only use this information for legal purposes. I never went public with it or used it as blackmail material. I wanted to keep it as private as I possibly could. One night, she had another outburst. She began to hit and bite me. But I finally decided that I was done being a victim. I locked myself in the bedroom, barricaded the door, and called the police. I waited for what felt like an eternity as she violently banged on the door. "I'm gonna kill you! I'm gonna fucking kill you!" she screamed over and over. Eventually, she walked away from the door, and I heard her screaming in pain. Turns out, she had burned her arm on the stove in order to show the police officers and blame me. When the police arrived, she showed them the massive burn on her forearm and told them I was the one who had assaulted her. However, I handed the officers the envelope and USB drive with all the evidence my private investigator and I had gathered. When she realized she could no longer force me to stay with her, she became irate and lunged at me. Thankfully, the police officers quickly subdued her, put her in handcuffs, and took her to the station. As I saw her leaving in the squad car, I began crying. I knew she couldn't hurt me anymore, and I could finally move on with my life. I decided not to press charges because I didn't think prison would help her. I knew she needed professional help. I also didn't want to relive my trauma in a courtroom in front of a large group of people. I just wanted it all to be over, her to stay away from me, and to move on with my life. But you better believe I kicked all her shit to the curb and filed the mother of all restraining orders. After it was over, she moved back in with her parents. We lived in a small town, so even though I never went public with any of this, word still got around about what had happened. Eventually, everyone knew what kind of person she was. Because of this, her parents decided to move the family to another state, and she went with them. 1 year went by, and it was one of the best years of my life. I managed to score a new job and met the love of my life, who later became pregnant with our first child. I didn't hear anything from or about my ex, and hoped it would stay that way, until I got a phone call one night. I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my fiancée. I answered the phone, and it was my mom. She told me she got a call from my ex's aunt, who informed her that my ex had taken a concoction of various pills and drowned herself in a lake near her house in an apparent suicide. I was in shock. A part of me was sad and blamed myself for not making sure she got the help she needed while we were together. But I also knew I was her victim. Despite everything she put me through, I tried my best to get her the help she so desperately needed. But there was nothing else I could have done under those circumstances. However, I'd be lying if I said there also wasn't a part of me that felt relief. I know that sounds awful, but knowing my abuser no longer existed in this world carried some kind of twisted comfort on its own. Now, I knew that she couldn't hurt me anymore, no matter what. At least, that's what I thought. Another year passed, and my beautiful baby boy was born. My fiancée and I have been learning the ropes of parenthood. I had largely moved on from the trauma of my previous relationship, made peace with what had happened to my ex, and forgiven myself for not being able to help her. Everything was finally going my way. Until last night, my fiancée and I were asleep in our room. This was one of the rare occasions when our newborn was also fast asleep in his crib and not crying the entire night. I had been working long hours while my fiancée stayed home on maternity leave. On top of that, we're currently spending most of our free time scanning the housing market for a new place. Needless to say, we were getting some much-needed rest. Suddenly, I was awoken by what felt like a very cold, wet hand wrap around my neck. I jumped up immediately and looked around. My fiancé and son were fast asleep. There was no one else in the room, but my neck was now wet and cold. I figured it was bad dream or something, and the wetness on my neck was just sweat. I didn't think much of it and attempted to go back to sleep. As I shut my eyes, the sound of a woman's sobbing began echoing through the apartment. It started off quiet, but got progressively louder. I shot back up and listened hard. I kept hearing it. It wasn't in my head. I slowly got up out of bed, walked out of the room, and shut the door behind me, making sure to lock it on my way out. I stepped into a puddle as I made my way down the hall. I noticed a trail of water leading all the way to the living room. I began to follow it. As I neared the living room, I heard a strange scratching noise as the sobbing continued. It sounded like someone was scratching their scalp. Immediately, I began to think of my ex. "That's impossible," I whispered to myself. As soon as I got to the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. A woman with long, wet, jet-black hair was sitting on the couch facing away from me. She was crying and scratching at her scalp. At that moment, I knew who it was, but I didn't want to believe it. I was frozen with fear. Suddenly, she stopped crying and slowly turned her head around. Darkness concealed much of her face, but I saw her eyes very clearly. They were filled with anger and hatred. As she turned her neck, I could hear the cracking of her bones. Then she jumped up onto the couch as she simultaneously turned around completely to face me. I could see her more clearly now, as the street lights outside the window illuminated her face. Her skin was pale white and wrinkled, her clothing was wet and torn, and her hair was messy, covering parts of her face. It was her. What how? I struggled to get words out as I began to hyperventilate. I thought I was surely dreaming, or maybe I had gone mad. We stood there for a while, just staring at each other. I don't know for how long. Suddenly, she let out an awful, blood-curdling scream and lunged at me on all fours. I quickly turned around and bolted back toward the bedroom. The only thought on my mind was to prevent her from getting to my son and fiancé. As I ran down the hall, I looked back and saw her crawling on the ceiling like a spider at lightning speed. Her hair was covering her face as her head violently thrashed from side to side. I got to the bedroom door and stood in front of it, ready to prevent her from getting in. But when I turned around, she was gone. My fiancé unlocked the door and swung it open. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered with a concern on her face. "You're going to wake the baby." I couldn't get the words out to explain it to her. I turned on all the lights and searched through every corner of the apartment. I found drops of water on the ground. I also scanned the couch and noticed wet, muddy footprints on the beige cushions. My fiancée came into the living room, and I showed her all the evidence. Her first thought was that someone had broken in, but then I told her what I really saw. Surprisingly, she said she believed what I had seen. I'm not sure if she just said that to calm me down, or if she really meant it. She hugged me as I began to sob. "It was her? It was her?" I kept saying. "She can't hurt you anymore, baby," she replied as we embraced. But then, to our pure horror, we heard a distorted voice from the baby monitor. "I'm gonna fucking kill you," the voice snarled. Then our son began to scream. We immediately ran to our bedroom, but as we were about to reach the door, it slammed shut and locked on its own. We pounded on it as our son continued to cry even louder. Adrenaline took over, and I gave the door 3 swift kicks until it ripped off its hinges. We ran inside and found our son was still crying, but thankfully unharmed. My fiancé picked him up, and we noticed his sheets were soaked with mud and water. He was also covered with long black hairs. If she didn't believe me at first, she definitely did at that point. We left the apartment immediately after and are now staying at my parents' house. I don't think we'll ever be going back. I was never a person who believed in the supernatural, but after what happened last night, I don't know anymore. Maybe she is somehow drawn to that apartment since it's where we used to live together, so hopefully staying here will prevent her from finding us. My fiancé is scared. I'm scared, and we don't know how, or if we're going to sleep tonight. We threw some holy water around my parents' house in an attempt to keep her away, but we don't know if that's going to work. I thought I would never hear from her again, but 2 years after I broke free from the abuse, and 1 year after her death, she is still inflicting new trauma onto my family and I. Even from the grave, she continues to torture me. Fourth story. I always went to the same supermarket I'd gone to essentially my whole life. It was a ritual to swing by after work a few days each week and pick up dinner for the family along with a few other groceries. I contemplated breakfast cereal choices as I stared down at the same cracked vinyl tile in the same aisle I've stood in many times before, with the same old-school luminescent light bulbs flickering overhead. As much as it might have embarrassed me when I was younger to say, my guilty pleasure has always been sugary cereals, and even since childhood I've always been a fan of whatever had marshmallows in it, especially the one everyone saw on the TV. They're magically delicious. I thought to myself while reminiscing of those old commercials, and opted to buy the name brand for once instead of the knockoffs that tasted half stale all the time. I felt even more amused when I noticed the upper top label that promised a special surprise in that limited edition run of boxes. I normally wouldn't have gone for any of this, but my wife had already informed me that her and the kids would be having dinner with her parents that night, and not to expect them home before I went to bed that night. I usually left for my job at the walnut packing factory every morning at 4:30 a.m., so I usually tried to be in bed by 9:30. So I thought, why not just enjoy a bowl of cereal before bed on this particular evening? Truth be told, I had lived out the usual cliche of marrying my high school sweetheart and never leaving the small town I'd grown up in. I'd planned to pursue a career as an engineer, but my collegiate career was cut short by baby number one when we were 19 years old. So I did the right thing and got a job at the walnut processing factory and just summed it up to the way life goes sometimes. By the time the third child had arrived, my once sweetheart was now constantly enraged by even the sight of me. There were many nights that she and the kids, who were now teenagers and also disdained my existence, would simply choose to have dinner elsewhere. I was, at this point, the slob that paid the bills and a hindrance to their joy in life, it seemed. I chuckled to myself as the acne-ridden cashier rang up this cereal because I knew my wife would nag at me for daring to buy expensive cereal for just myself. As I loaded the groceries into my old Toyota, though, I thought that I heard a voice coming from one of the bags. I shook it off as a long day taking its toll, but then I swore that I saw a red glow in my back seat that I just happened to catch for a second in my rear view mirror. I cannot explain why, but I got home, I quickly found the box of cereal, opened and peeled the plastic bag open, and started to pour my bowl. That's when I heard the little thunk and quickly remembered the promise of a surprise in every box. It too was wrapped in a small plastic baggie, and when I opened it up, it actually gave me a startle. There was that familiar image, the shamrock green attire and top hat, along with the red hair sticking out from underneath that hat, the blank stare in its eyes as it faced forward, and an almost eerie grin spread across its face in a far from natural way, all in a 5 stature. The thing creeped me out, if I'm being honest, so simply shoved it into the spare kitchen drawer where we kept our batteries. I inadvertently hit the button I never realized was on the backside of the figurine. This caused its eyes to light up red and a small recording repeat. They're magically delicious, in an Irish accent. I felt more than a little unnerved at the idea that this was supposed to be a children's toy, but shrugged it off and proceeded to shut the drawer and to down not one, but 2 bowls of that marshmallow goodness that night. After I finished, I headed out of the kitchen and upstairs. I paused and looked towards the box of cereal. Thanks for a trip down memory lane and a nice treat, but I'm afraid your magic can't fix all of my problems before I continued up the stairs towards my bedroom. I was only halfway up the stairs when I thought I heard something along the lines of, "Let's test your luck," and a dull red glow casting shadows from the kitchen. I was either extremely tired or I was losing it, so I admittedly jetted up the stairs a bit creeped out. Usually I would stay awake until I heard my family arrive home downstairs on nights like this, and then I'd go to sleep. They might hate the sight of me, but I still felt the innate sense to ensure they were safe. That night, though, I fell almost immediately into one of the deepest sleeps I'd ever experienced and dreamed all night about things I'd long given up on. In my dream, I was in college out east somewhere, the top of my class, and a top engineering job already waiting for me when I graduated. I also had a supermodel girlfriend who was pursuing a degree in fashion, and we were planning a weekend away together on the coast when a red glow overcame my dreams and an almost primal-sounding scream jolted me out of my sleep. I reached over instinctually to check on my wife. She wasn't there, which gave me a slight pause, but she was known to sleep in the spare bedroom when she felt especially annoyed by my presence. Still, that scream had me on edge, so I bolted out of bed and started down the upstairs hallway. That's when I heard the second scream and recognized it immediately as my oldest son's. I darted down the stairs as fast as I could, and as I did, my nostrils were assaulted by the most metallic smell that I couldn't place in my state of panic at the moment. I saw a red glow come and go in waves in my descent, and then swore I heard the sound of the most disgusting type of slurping noise, much like when a 4-year-old eats spaghetti. I ran straight around the corner towards the kitchen, but I slipped immediately on the tile and slammed the back of my head upon landing. When I tried to get up, I kept slipping and loosing my grip from something wet and slimy on the floor. I finally crawled to the light switch by the refrigerator, and when I turned it on, I yelled aloud when I realized that I was covered in blood. It wasn't just a little bit of blood either. It was literally everywhere in the kitchen, on the table, handprints on the cabinets and fridge, and pools of it leading to the living room and onto the carpet. And it wasn't just blood either. The viscera reminded me of the summer I spent working at the local poultry processor as a teenager. There were pieces of, well, something once living everywhere I looked in that kitchen, along with shreds of clothing that I recognized as belonging to my wife. I started screaming for my family, but received no response. In a panic, I rushed all over the house, but saw no evidence of any of them anywhere. That is, except for the blood and carnage that the entire house was covered in. I didn't want to believe what I knew the source of all of this once was. I scrambled to find my cell phone that was tucked away in my jacket on the kitchen chair the night before and dialed 911. But right as I started to dial, I saw that red glow again. This time I realized exactly where it was coming from sitting, not from the drawer any longer, but right in front of me on the kitchen table. The light intensified beyond what any reasonable person would believe possible for the figurine, and then I heard a familiar distorted voice begin to play. "They're magically delicious." It was then that I realized that the grin on its face had dropped into an even deeper arc, and the figurine was absolutely coated in deep red blood. To my astonishment, I realized now that I was actually seeing its plastic mouth break free of its natural boundaries, and its lips began to move as it repeated itself. "Ahem," I said, "they were magically delicious." I yelled at him with both the most fear and rage a being could ever muster up within themselves, and asked where my family was. "Your wish was my command, my friend. You are a free man now, so let's say you and I go find what's at the end of your rainbow, eh?" Besides, they truly were magically delicious. The first story. My story starts when I was 5 or 6. That's when I first picked up a ukulele. I loved my ukulele with all my heart. Still do, obviously, and I'm grateful for all the success I've had because of it. Here's the problem. I don't deserve it, not entirely anyway. My parents never told me to practice, I just did. I practiced day and night, until my hands hurt. It was slow going at first. Then one day, everything changed. I was playing Hey, Soul Sister when I noticed a peculiar sound like a heartbeat, quietly keeping time, like a built-in metronome. Except, of course, back then, I had no idea what a metronome was. But it was there all right, guiding me. Having no idea where the sound was coming from, I scanned the room for intruders. Then it dawned on me. The sound was coming from my own mind. I shrugged it off and continued practicing, but the sound remained. Over time, a voice started speaking to me, giving me tips. The voice was creepy. Sometimes it would say stuff that was highly inappropriate, especially to a young girl like me. But I was still a kid, so I thought nothing of it. Instead, I gave him a name, Mr. Creeper. Mr. Creeper became my imaginary friend, except, of course, he wasn't imaginary, nor was he my friend. Before I go on, let's get one thing clear. Mr. Creeper was, and still is, very much real, and he's not an anomaly. There are many evil spirits lurking about, more than you would care to know. When I told my mother, she scoffed at me, so much so that I cried and threw a fit, smashing my uke into 1,000,000 pieces. Then I cried some more, because I no longer had a uke. Oh, what a fuss I made. Mr. Creeper was displeased. That night he appeared to me moments before I fell asleep, threatening to hurt me if I stopped making music. Apparently, Mr. Creeper had plans for me. It was the first time I'd seen him, and it scared me half to death. His face was covered in warts and boils. His belly was bulging like a beach ball. His eyes were weird and googly, and seemed to see in all directions at once. What scared me most was his teeth, long and sharp and severe. I cried myself to sleep that night, and suffered from a series of vicious night terrors that have remained with me ever since. My mother, being a gracious woman, bought me a brand new ukulele for Christmas. A nicer one, in fact. Mr. Creeper was pleased. Time passed. Mr. Creeper continued haunting me, but my memory of those days is fuzzy. I was still a kid. By the time I turned 12, I'd stopped playing the uke. I was a busy girl. Mr. Creeper went away until one day, while alone in my candle-lit bedroom, he startled me. "Hey, Britt," Mr. Creeper said, his voice cold and crisp. My heart stopped beating. Standing more like hovering over my bed was Mr. Creeper. Disparaging thoughts crashed through my mind. In truth, I'd thought Mr. Creeper was gone for good. "Wrong?" He snarled. "Why, you hard of hearing?" I tried speaking, but the sound was gibberish. "Why don't you get that ukulele out of your closet? Play me a tune, why don't you?" After minutes, maybe hours of comprehending what the heck was happening, I bolted. Mother was at work, but Dad was visiting, so I told him. My cheeks were red and sopping with tears. He ruffled my rosy red hair, calling me his silly little princess. But I relented. When he saw how serious I was, he tossed me onto his back. He hadn't done this in years, and charged playfully upstairs into my bedroom. I gasped. Mr. Creeper was above my bed, twirling his pitchfork tail. His eyes were cruel and hateful. "He won't see me, you know," the monster said. "He's too old and stupid." "Hey," I blurted involuntarily. My father shot me an uneasy look. "See, Princess, no monsters. Just a 12-year-old girl's bedroom, which needs cleaning, by the way." He nudged me. He was joking, but I could tell he sensed the monster, because his eyes were scanning the room and his face was pale as water. His feet wouldn't stop shuffling. Clearly, he was eager to leave my haunted bedroom, and for good reason. Mr. Creeper was making choking gestures, strangling himself with his wretched red tail, taunting him. It took every ounce of restraint not to scream in holy terror. As we left my bedroom, something struck me. I tripped and tumbled downstairs, spraining my ankle in the process. Dad zoomed me to the hospital. That was a bad day. Time passed. Then one day after school, my old uke was resting neatly on my bed. "That's impossible," I told myself shakily as a cold chill dripped down my spine. The ukulele was beckoning me. I'd forgotten how beautiful she was. My hands trembled as I strummed her. Weird thing was, even though I hadn't played her in years, she was still in tune. I played 15 by Taylor Swift. I still remembered the chords. The pulse returned, keeping time, the lights in my bedroom flickered, and a spotlight fell on me. Suddenly, I was center stage. An invisible audience started jeering. I could feel the tension in the room, anticipating my next song. "Mr. Creeper," I quietly spoke. I felt him crawling inside my head. It was awful, really, like a virus scratching my skull. "Play." That's all he said. The crowd started chanting, "Brit, Brit, Brit." Reluctantly, I played an Ed Sheeran song which sounded eerily similar to the previous song. "Wha? Did I say you can stop?" Mr. Creeper heckled. "Did yo' mama raise a quitter?" The crowd turned on me, heckling me with a chorus of, "Brit sucks, Brit sucks, Brit sucks." I was so scared that I peed myself. Good thing no one was around to laugh at me, except, of course, Mr. Creeper. After cleaning myself up, I tiptoed back into my bedroom, careful not to trip and fall, like I needed another sprain. "This is ridiculous," I told myself. "I'm nearly 13, too old to believe in spooks." My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't like it, nor did I trust it. "Brit," Mr. Creeper said, "play another song, something melancholy in a minor key." My bedroom lights dimmed. All the candles blew out, although I don't recall lighting any. My mouth was dry. My heart was going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I wiped my sweaty bangs from my forehead and took a deep breath. "Hurry it up, wantcha?" Someone in the crowd chirped, scaring the daylights out of me. The crowd was growing restless. "Yeah, we ain't got all day," followed by, "Yeah, kid, we got all millennia." I've never been more scared in my life. I closed my eyes and prayed for them to go away. This must be a dream. Or maybe I was getting sick. When my eyes popped open, I nearly died. Mr. Creeper was directly in front of me, seething. Globs of drool glistened from his dagger-like teeth, his fatty fingers fidgeting while he floated in thin air. I tried to move, but my mind and body wouldn't cooperate. When his teeth touched the nape of my neck, I shrieked. My mother bolted into my bedroom, and seeing how scared I was, she let me sleep on the fold-out couch in the living room. I was grateful, but I wasn't stupid. The monster was lurking in my bedroom, waiting. Needless to say, I avoided my bedroom all week, but by the weekend, I started practicing again. It's difficult to explain why, but any musician will tell you. The music is inside you, yearning to get out. I was a prisoner to it. It controlled me. So did Mr. Creeper. Next time he appeared, I pleaded for him to leave me alone. Nah, Mr. Creeper replied, flying directly above me. I've got big plans for you. But why me? Mr. Creeper's googly eyes bobbled back and forth. Why not? He thrusted his razor-sharp claws against my freckled throat. I shrunk into the size of a pea. I was going to add my rebuttal when the uke flew into my hands. I gasped as it found my grip. Play, the monster instructed. I played. To my astonishment, I was exceptional, so much so that I made up a song on the spot. Then I made a video and posted it. That video went viral. You've probably seen it. It's called Creeper's Lament, my first hit song. You could say the rest is history, and you'd be correct. Not gonna lie, I liked the newfound fame. Who wouldn't? My classmates started treating me differently. Suddenly, I was special, if only for a week. I started pumping out more videos. My fame quickly spread. The principal called me into her office, asking if I'd be interested in performing at the end of the year talent show. I agreed. My parents were thrilled and bought me the best ukulele money could buy. That's when I performed Flight of the Bumblebee, using only one hand. Bam! Another viral video. You may remember it. I was wearing a long black dress with white buttons shaped as stars, and my hair was braided. The kids in the crowd were shouting for an encore, so I played 2 Beatles songs at the same time, surprising even me. The kids ate it up. So did the internet. You may remember the rest. After going viral, I made a series of top 10 albums spanning many years. Unbelievable. People adored me. And why not? I helped inspire an entire generation of kids to play the ukulele. They all wanted to be the next Brit star. My concerts sold out fast. My father was now managing me. He was nice and all, but things got weird. You see, it wasn't me playing. It was Mr. Creeper. Sounds nuts, I know, but it's true. Mr. Creeper was guiding me, providing me with unbelievable dexterity. Songs arrived fully formed in my mind. After years of recording albums and touring the world, while finishing high school online in my spare time, which was never, Mr. Creeper became erratic. Nothing seemed to satisfy him. To please him, I was forced to play a medley of rock classics. Stairway to Heaven, Highway to Hell, Hotel California, Smells Like Teen Spirit, the list goes on, and one which earned me an entire new audience. But even that wasn't good enough. No, not for Mr. Creeper. He wanted more. Always more. That's when I started doing stunts. Playing a flaming ukulele, performing upside down, walking a tightrope, you name it. The shows got more and more elaborate. So did my costumes. Over time, people got bored of my antics. I didn't blame them. In fact, I was relieved. Unfortunately, my father was furious. Turns out, Mr. Creeper had infected his mind as well, causing him to drink and act belligerent. Thus, I announced my retirement. I just turned 25, and I was a millionaire. I didn't need the stress. I was looking to open my very own music school. School of Uke. Sounds cool, right? Wrong. Mr. Creeper threatened to kill me. You do as I say, Britt. You hear me? His claws scratched my spine, causing internal bleeding. I was rushed to the hospital where I nearly died. Mr. Creeper wreaked havoc on the other patients. I'll kill them all if you don't do as I say. That was dreadful. So was the fact that no one believed me. My father made me a deal. I could quit touring, but I would continue making music. I refused. So he made another offer. I could publish my very own autobiography and live off the royalties. I agreed. Maybe I can finally get my story out. Mr. Creeper went on another rampage, tearing up my bedroom, haunting me day and night. He was merciless. Sleeping became impossible, because that's when he's strongest. I was at my wit's end. I had to do something. So I did. It came to me during a dream. I could enter his mind as well. I used this to my advantage, and over time, I learned to harness his magic. Thus, I've created a spell. My spell, if it works, will undo my fame and fortune. Therefore, when you read this, the name Brit Star will mean nothing to you, and I can go back to being normal. Phew, what a relief. So why am I telling you this on Reddit, no less? Because once my father read the first draft of my autobiography, he went ballistic. After weeks of squabbling, he hired a ghostwriter. Most celebrities do this, I know, but I was appalled. But no worries, if my plan works, the public won't remember me or my music, and all my troubles will disappear, including my autobiography. Therefore, the mods at NowSleep will also forget me, and thus not remove this story. Because they too will have no idea who I am, and they'll think this is mere fiction. Alas, the spell is complete. It's entwined into this story. How I did it, I'll never tell, not in a million years. But what about Mr. Creeper, you ask? Will he go away? Doubt it. But hopefully he'll grow tired of me and haunt some other little kid. Not my problem. If my spell is successful, by the time I post this, you will have long forgotten my name. Not only that, you will have forgotten my concerts and all the time you spent commenting on my posts. Those comments will disappear, along with their memory. My TikTok account will vanish. I will mean nothing to you. Thus, I will be scrubbed, along with my fame and fortune. My parents will know me, obviously, but they will have no recollection of my so-called music career. Heck, I'll probably open that music studio, and if I'm lucky, I'll live happily ever after. No more monsters. Reading this now, you probably think this is just a silly story. Perfect. That's the plan. That's why I've taken my story to Reddit, using a male avatar, no less. Just in case. I doubt my father will stumble upon this, because he doesn't use Reddit, but I can't take any chances. If by chance you do remember me, and my spell failed, that's okay too. I'll have to live with that. Hey, at least you'll understand the grief I've gone through, and cut me some slack. Or maybe you'll think I'm nuts. Whatever, I'm over it. So here goes. I'm so nervous I can barely keep my hands close to the keys. Mr. Creeper is clawing me, and I'm bleeding profusely, but he won't stop me. Not this time. Will my spell work? There's only one way to find out. Here goes. Second story. A small warning, there's nothing intense about this story. This is merely something that, despite its subtlety, scares me shitless. And unfortunately, I can't even prove if it is strictly paranormal. All I can do is say my honest truth. Let me preface this with a little bit about myself. I am a well-built southern male with a case of resting bitch face. Of course, I'm overweight, but between my southern charm and my general looks, I don't have much trouble from neither animals nor people. The very general, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone kind of thing. Well, people in real life often call me Hulk or Hercules. My online friends just call me Fat Thor or Walmart Jesus. Also, yes, I was taught in public education if my grammar wasn't making it blatantly obvious. Ever since I was a little kid and I watched Jeepers Creepers, I've always been scared shitless of the dark. Or rather poignantly, what lurks in the dark. And that's why working late shift at my job has got me acting quite foolish. This little door monster of mine started when I had to cover 2 hours of a later shift. My boss, the shift lead, had to get ready for her other job. Two, the new guys had quit via no call, no show. Something that I have no doubt that you can relate to. I noticed something in my half-groggy-ass state of mind. The sensors we used to tell if a customer had came in would ring whenever I was nearby the doors. And before you assault me with no shit Sherlock, it was at a weirdly inconsistent range. Sometimes I would be in the literal center of the store and one of them would go off. This place almost completely dies off around 8 p.m. center of the universe standard time, and I am trained like a hound during day shift to look towards whichever door had a customer coming through and have someone greet them. Typical hospitality, meaning when you hear the things go off and there's not even signs of the door opening. Big spook. During this day, as soon as the midnight shift guy would come in, I talked about it with him. Guy acted like I was talking about the most nonchalant topic possible. He says it happens all the time to him. Well, tonight, I decided since I'm next in line for promotion and my direct superior is moving to another store for a promotion, it's time to swoon the boss's be big man. Except this entire shift, I have been having the weird paranoia to look outside glass doors. These doors open towards the outside, so the notorious West Texas winds aren't pushing the doors open. Not to mention that tonight, there's literally no wind. I know because I had to go and wake up a trucker to have him move so we can get more gas in the truck stop. I can tell you for certain that there is 2 things aside from the store's doors, randomly blaring at me that have me wanting to just go home and have a good cry. It's the fact that every once in a while my eyes are playing tricks on me and I see a weird shadow on the reflections of the 2 set of doors. And also in the background where we keep a lot of our backstock, I can hear something slamming on stuff. If it wasn't that I was watching a bunch of horror movies explained, I'd go back there and investigate it. It seems like whatever is fucking with me on this night is enjoying my paranoia. Luckily, this is a well-lit trucker stop with an assortment of hardware. So if there is someone in the back of my store deciding to fuck with me, I will hammer you non-sexually but very violently. I keep telling myself that it's on my head, or it can be explained by the average creaks and bumps you would expect from an older establishment. For the pleasant reality that in an hour and a half someone's going to come up here and look on the cameras to see me acting like a scared puppy of the thunderstorm. But the number one thing that is fucking with me right now is I can hear a quieter, ghostly version of the blaring door alarms. And I always check both doors to make sure we don't have a guest. Third story. I don't really do much with my life, socially at least. Day to day, everybody seems to be preoccupied with their friends and their activities, and they seem to be so fulfilled by it. But I've never understood it. It's not that I hate people, I just feel like they complicate things more than they need to be, and I prefer not to spend too much time around them. I enjoy small chunks of people's company, don't get me wrong, I've just always leaned more to the introverted side of things. I'd rather just be by myself, going on walks like I usually do. I enjoy nature and the animals that surround it. They don't seem to cause as much drama as people. The animals just mind their own business. There's an overgrown trail way off in the bush that I like walking along. It's pretty well known in the small area I live in, so even though it's pretty out of the way, you do see people walking along it occasionally, just not very often, which is the way I like it. While walking down the trail, I take in the scents and the sounds. My favorite sounds of all, though, are the birds. There are so many of them, there are so many different species around where I live, and they all make different calls. It's like they're from a different planet altogether. They're weird, but I like them. Through my walks, I've learned to match practically every call to each corresponding bird, except for one. I don't know what it looks like, but it sounds nothing like the rest of them, and I only just started hearing this bird recently. Many weeks and walks went by without me finding the answer to that question. What kind of bird is making that sound? One day I was on a walk down the same trail, and I came across a pretty large man I've never seen before. He wasn't fat or anything, just big. He was intimidating. He was stood at the side of the trail, completely still, aiming his camera up towards the trees. I guess there was some type of rare bird he was looking to take a picture of. Sometimes you see that down here. Excitement filled me as I realized that maybe he had the answer to what type of bird I was hearing. Maybe that's what he was trying to take a picture of. I went up to him, planning to introduce himself so I could ask him. He seemed really standoffish and almost rude. I don't know why. Maybe I scared off the bird he was trying to take a picture of. All I know is I never got my answer, and he stormed off before I could even get his name. Wasn't much of a people person, I guess, and here I thought that was me. A couple more weeks went by, and I was walking down the trail again, except this time there were a ton of police officers surrounding the side of the trail up ahead. As I got closer, one of them noticed me and came running towards me, telling me not to come near the area because it was an active crime scene. I asked what had happened. He looked extremely stressed. He wouldn't give me any real details, which made me wonder if it was something actually serious. All he asked me was if I'd seen a tall, large man around the area lately. I gave him a description, told him the little bit I knew, and I went home thinking I would never hear about it again. That situation freaked me out a bit, so I haven't gone on walks for a while. I've just been at my house for weeks. I just had a really bad feeling about all of this. My imagination was probably just getting the best of me. I was bored and flicking through the channels when something caught my attention. The news and a very familiar face. The man I saw that day was charged with several counts of murder. What I encountered that day was a serial killer. My hands started to shake. He wasn't any ordinary serial killer, though, they explained. He had his signatures that he would leave behind. He would leave physical impressions on these people, so the police knew they were dealing with the same lunatic. He was taunting them. Every victim would be taken out to the forest, tied up so tightly that they couldn't move a finger, and he would leave them out there to rot. That wasn't the worst part, though. He would skillfully, with almost surgical precision, cut out a very specific piece of their esophagus, changing how the air would travel through their throat, like he was carving out a musical instrument, in such a way that if they tried to make a sound, people wouldn't bat an eye, in such a way that when they cried for help, they would only blend into the background, inadvertently mimicking the sounds of nature that hopelessly surrounded them. Fourth story. Made it my mission to never get too close to anywhere cold ever again. After living in a now abandoned town in the South Yukon for over half my life, I now reside in Jacksonville, Florida with my wife and daughter. I've seen a lot in my youth, and I have to say starting a family has definitely made me a better man. I work a stressful job with long hours, and Marley, my wife, works weird hours as a nurse. It may not be the perfect setup, as I usually juggle seeing just one of them around the house, but it is far better than enduring what I had been through. It's not that I entirely hate the cold. I'm just not safe in it. The cold is dangerous. Sometimes I still hear it. I sometimes still hear them. I caught myself hearing their noises while looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, louder and louder, muffling out the noises. I thought it was all behind me. I haven't seen or done anything in years that reminded me of my time living in Avons. Another muffled noise began to break through the noises, my salvation. "Daddy," I heard Eve, my daughter, call out from her room. I probably scared her, but I charged from the bathroom to her room. She looked bored sitting on top of her covers. I scooped her up off of her bed and into my arms. The noises had faded with my daughter's laughter. "I'm sorry, did I scare you?" I said, putting her back down on the bed. "No, you didn't. It was fun," Eve cooed back at me, getting herself cozy underneath her covers. I recomposed myself. "So what's up, kiddo? I heard you calling." "Mommy isn't here to tuck me in, so I did it myself. Can you tell me a story for bed?" "I know, kiddo. Mom's got a busy shift. It's becoming a very scary world out there." Eve's eyes lit up after that last part. "Oh, can you tell me a scary story then?" "Eve, you won't be able to sleep if I tell you a scary story." She didn't relent. She shot her puppy dog eyes at me that any parent would give in to. I thought about what I was experiencing in the bathroom earlier. I hadn't told many people about it, except Marley and my therapist, of course. Talking about it helps, my therapist would tell me often, but who the hell would believe me? I grinned away my anxiety. "Okay, get comfy." Eve giggled and got herself even cozier than I thought she could. With a deep, shaky breath, I began my story. There was a town way up north, outside of the country. It was a town called Avons. A sad boy, a bit older than you, Eve, lived with his mom and dad. This town was full of adults and teenagers that were bored all the time. There was almost nothing to do but to watch TV or go out to the bar with friends. "A bar?" Eve asked. "It's a place where adults go to. Spend time together. You're only 11, you got 10 years before you're allowed to go," I responded. "Okay, keep going," she encouraged me. There was something about Avons that made it a bad place. It was always cold. There was even snow on the ground. It made all the people never want to go outside, so the little boy stayed in his room, reading most of his days away. One day the boy noticed something strange. He couldn't see outside because it was snowing so much. His neighbor's house, which he used to see all the time from his window, was invisible. A little bit scared, he ran to his parents, who were also scared. They huddled together in their living room as the wind howled and the snow piled up louder and louder. "Something's not right," the boy's dad said. "Eleanor, are the phones working?" "No, dear, the boy's mom," Eleanor said. "What are we supposed to do? We can't go outside in this." The boy's dad was furious, but more than that, he was terrified. He was supposed to go to the grocery store to pick up food. The storm had gotten so bad that the doors to their home wouldn't even open. The boy's dad had to use all of his might just to get the door open, and it slammed shut on the way out. The boy and his mom heard him pounding on the door almost immediately after. They heard the man, his father, begging for them to open the door. The boy and his mom did their best, but the wind was too strong. They couldn't get the door open. The boy watched in horror as his dad. I began to shake a little bit. Eve stared at me, concerned. "Sorry, baby, just thinking of a way to continue this story," I lied. His dad was too cold. He was so cold he was blue, his face frozen in a twisted face of fear as he tried to break in through the window, but something stopped him. "What stopped him?" Eve asked. I swallowed my nerves and continued. "A song stopped him. It was a very nice song. Even the boy and his mom could hear it. It was graceful, relaxing them if even for a moment. The boy's father stopped what he was doing and began walking towards where the song was coming from. It was from the center of town. The boy watched helplessly as his father was picked up by an arm and carried towards the center of town. The boy and his mom were now scared beyond belief. Something had taken his dad away from them. The boy never saw his dad again. The song filled his ears. It was the only thing he could hear. Whatever took his dad was close by. "Hide, Tommy, hide," his mom begged him. He could barely hear her over the noises. He hid in the closet, crying. The song was louder than his own sobbing. The boy's mom grabbed a big pointy knife from the kitchen, yelling and pointing at something. She was very angry, but boy couldn't make out the words she was saying. The only thing he knew is that she saw something out in the snow. Suddenly, the window broke, and a big long arm covered in feathers reached for her. The boy never saw her again. The boy fainted from the fear. He woke up later, shivering. There were men in his house. They said they were looking for people and that they were there to help. The song he had heard was much quieter than before, enough to think that he was safe. He called out, and the men in big green uniforms helped him to his feet. They gave him winter clothes and a nice snack. They carried him into their big green truck where we was much warmer. The boy watched as the truck drove through town. It struggled and slipped through the heavy snow. Many of the men in the truck were scared. The boy looked out the window when they passed the center of town. There was a big hole right in the center. There were also monsters. Monsters? Eve asked nervously. What kind of monsters? Do you really want to know? I asked back, my lips quivering. Her eyes lit up. Yeah. I don't think she caught on that this was happening to me, but those eyes and that smile gave me courage. There was a big monster floating over the hole. It was almost as white as the snow. It had large wings and even longer arms. There were smaller monsters that looked like the big one, but without wings. They all sang the song the boy had heard. They sang as they threw the people they were grabbing into the hole. The boy was forced to look away as the men in the truck pulled him away from the window, telling him never to look at it again. The boy was scared for life. He probably will never stop being scared. But he lived. I stared out into distance for a moment. The end? I said. Eve giggled and rolled on her side. I didn't know you could tell good stories too, Daddy. I have some talent, I guess. Good night, kiddo. Love you lots. I kissed her on the head and left the room, turning her lights off on the way out. I know one day she may figure it out that I was telling her of my frozen, fucked-up childhood. But she wanted scary, and I wanted to release some of my pent-up feelings. I decided to get ready for bed myself. I looked in the mirror because I heard small footsteps hurry to the bathroom door. Daddy, are you okay? I heard Eve call out in concern. I'm fine, I'm just tired. I pathetically came up with a response. Okay, well, how about I tell you a story while you go to bed instead? Fifth story. Nick was a velvety black, 11-year-old mutt with serious swagger. A dog of any breed, any size, can have swagger, and Nick, who was 45 pounds and walked with a limp from a rear paw injured long ago, strutted like a king. I developed strong opinions about dogs and their personalities and their secret histories because it's a way to pass the time when I'm walking them. Gigging as a dog walker can get pretty tired of care in the world. Meanwhile, I shivered in my thrifted overcoat and said things like, good boy, and you're such a pretty boy, or sometimes easy, if we passed by a dead squirrel or some ripe trash or anything else that aroused Nick's passions and triggered a barking fit and some pulling. Nick was a strong bastard, and my hands, cold even through my gloves, were painfully sensitive. Walking dogs was one of the gigs I did to pay the rent and eat while also playing bass in a punk band called Hunger. There were 4 of us: Penny, the singer, Bruce, the guitar player, Quattro, the bleached blonde drummer, and me. We all gigged multiple places, even Bruce, who everyone knew had a trust fund. Hunger played coffee houses, church basements, house parties, dive bars, student unions, and any place else that would give us a few bucks and maybe some free beer and sandwiches. We were not on the verge of making it big. Nick paused in front of a big metal statue of some Revolutionary War general on a horse that was flaked and dented and turning green in places. I would swear he winked at me as he raised his leg and took a long, hot piss. You could tell how hot his piss was because of the way steam rose up from the hoar-frosted grass. The things you notice, dude, when you've got nothing else to do. Most of the folks I walked dogs for were somewhere between filthy rich and fuck you rich, and Nick's owner, Trevor Goodman, was a new media mogul. I couldn't really get a handle on what, if any, media Trevor's companies actually created. I knew he had bought some websites where buddies of mine had freelanced and fired almost everyone and sold this and spun off that, and maybe threw a big party. No one who had worked there before he bought it was invited to thank everyone for their hard work. So I should have hated him. But the thing about being around orgasmically rich folks when you're barely scraping by is that you can't help thinking, there must be a string of words I could say or some gestures I could make that would get this guy to like me enough to change my life. Nick, the black mutt with a hound's face and the body of some kind of fighting dog, was the only thing I had ever seen in Trevor's brownstone that wasn't sleek and cutting edge and so simple and elegant you couldn't ever afford it unless you were Trevor or someone like him. Nick's like one of the family, Trevor told me the first time I swung by to pick up the dog for a walk. Belonged to my father, God rest the old bastard, and I've had him ever since the old man bought the farm. He's about the only thing I'm sentimental about. I had leaned down to pet him and noticed that instead of the inevitable high-tech or high-fashion collar dogs of the rich and famous usually wore, his had a simple silver open eye as a charm that was fastened to an old strand of leather. So treat him like your life depends on him liking you. And then Trevor flashed the kind of malevolent smile that let me know his joke had not been intended to put me at ease. Nick pissed and trotted back the way we came while I held the leash and staggered, bleary-eyed and hungover, behind him. Waiting for the walk sign to light up on the corner of Euclid and Hotchkiss streets, hugging myself and stamping my feet to try to stay warm, someone said in a cool, measured voice, "I can give you anything you want, you know." I spun around, but there was no one there. I was alone on the sidewalk with Nick, who also hadn't noticed anything. He was staring straight ahead, panting happily enough. Wednesday of the following week, on a cold and sunny afternoon, about how rough times were and how nice it would be to have enough money to buy groceries and pay my electric bill both in the same month for once. I could give you anything you want, you know. What is it? You want to be a rock star, old boy? Easy as pie, nothing simpler. I looked around frantically again, and again there was nobody there. I felt a lump in my throat and my heart sped up. I had a cousin, Brad, who was a paranoid schizophrenic. Hearing voices his sophomore year at Duke was how it started, and now he was living on the streets in Charleston as far as I knew. I freaked out. We cut the walk short, and I hustled back to Trevor's brownstone, hoping that good old Nick would look happy enough for Trevor not to care that the walk was truncated. Actually, his assistant met me at the door and clearly didn't give two shits about me or the dog. I've never tried to do anything as frantically as I looked for a therapist in the days and weeks that followed. But I had no insurance, and it turned out lots of shrinks don't take insurance anyway, and almost no money, and the only one I could find who had credentials, sort of, and worked on a sliding income scale was an evangelical woman who listed conversion therapy as one of her specialties. If I met with her and told her I was hearing voices, she'd either try to give me an exorcism or start telling me about the voices she heard, I reckoned. Waiting for Trevor to finish up a phone call, I realized that I'd gone from thinking, maybe Trevor could help Hunger get a recording contract if I was charming enough, to, I wonder if he'd give me money to get a real shrink. Maybe it's tax deductible. Trevor held up a tanned, manicured finger to let me know he was going to be a minute. Nick trotted over and rubbed against my leg and sat down. I was glad for Trevor to see how good I was with his dog. "It's been an honor to get to know your dog," was how I might start if I got up the chutzpah to ask for money. Trevor laughed at something whoever was on the other line said, and then roared, "Oh, that asshole! Bro, I wouldn't piss on him with J and B." And then he gave me a grin and held up his finger again before walking out of the room and leaving me waiting for whatever instructions he had. Trevor, for example, how do you think he got his money? I helped him get it, that's how. In point of fact, Trevor's beloved father's death was no accident, if you follow me, old boy. And his meteoric success in a field he doesn't even understand has been entirely engineered by yours truly. This time when I looked around and then down, I saw that Nick was standing on two legs, grinning a dog's grin at me. I started to babble, and Nick put a big paw with hard, cold nails right on my chest. "Don't go zany on me, kid. We don't have the time. What you do must be done quickly." Sometimes I used to wonder how in the hell people who were convinced they were getting instructions from angels or aliens, well, I'm a kind of angel, old boy, haha, or God himself could function, and just then it became clear. When something so utterly impossible you can't conceive of it starts happening to you, one option is to just roll with it. I've been forced to serve the Goodman family for generations now, bound to them by magic and this goddamn amulet around my neck. "But you're 11 years old," I said weakly. "According to whom? Trevor, the latest generation of Goodmans, the one who arranged first and foremost that I cause his own father's death. Not the first Goodman to do that, by the way. In point of fact, I am thousands of years old and have been trapped by the god-awful Goodmans, originally of Massachusetts, since the late 17th century. The silence that followed was bright, pellucid, and seemed to last a year. Looking into Nick's eyes, I felt warm clarity wash through me. "What do I have to do?" I heard myself say in my own voice. "Not much, my friend. This amulet around my neck binds me to whomever is in possession of a certain talisman that Trevor always has with him. I can't remove it myself or even touch it without suffering terribly, but anyone else can. All I need you to do is rip this cursed collar off my neck, and fast." Nick was back on all fours now, panting peacefully, though his eyes still held me in thrall. I heard, or was sure I heard, footsteps heading toward us like Trevor was coming back. Without time to think, I reached down and tore the collar and the charm from his neck. The smart move would have been to leave it on and steal the talisman from Trevor instead. But you know what they say about hindsight. What happened next happened fast. Trevor walked into the room and Nick let out a rich, stentorian laugh. Trevor made this face like, oh shit, and Nick pounced. The struggle, if you want to call it that, was brief and one-sided. Trevor lay in a pool of his own blood, but he seemed to be grinning up at his high ceilings. Nick turned to face me, panting happily and holding a necklace with a cross hanging from it. The cross was ivory, and though I couldn't get a good look, then I have seen it many times since it is carved in the shape of the most grotesque crucifixion scene I have ever seen, in which Christ has a hideously huge phallus and the head of a goat. Gurgling noises were coming from Trevor. I realized these noises must have been him gathering a last bit of strength when he somehow turned his pulverized face to me and said clearly, despite the wound on his throat that he was bleeding to death from, "You're a fucking fool," and then he laughed, and as he laughed he died. Then Nick, staring at me, started to chant syllables I couldn't understand, but I found myself with a helpless, irresistible compulsion to pick up the collar and place it around my own neck as Nick continued chanting and panting. That very afternoon, kneeling on the floor, while Nick sat in a chair in a disturbingly human pose, sipping scotch from one of Trevor's crystal tumblers with surprisingly dexterous front paws, I called the other members of Hunger and told them I was leaving the band. Things happened for me fast after that. A year or so later, while I was in a private room recovering from an attempted suicide by shotgun and subsequent nervous breakdown at a luxury rehab center, Nick explained that another thing about the amulet was that the being who wore it was never able to end their own existence, as that would be a violation of the contract. The gun hadn't gone off, and a cleaning lady at the Ritz-Carlton I'd checked into to do the deed walked in just in time. The whole affair had only made me seem more haunted, more tortured, sexier, and album sales had never been better. More and more people were hearing the lyrics Nick and his cohorts penned for me and really taking them to heart. It's actually quite useful to have total control over a major rock star, my friend. Makes me the envy of all the other princes and dukes of hell, and I'll make sure you go straight to the top, the very pinnacle, even higher than you are now. I have so much to show you and so many uses to put you to. The first story. On a misty autumn evening, the ethereal veil of Willow Creek descended upon the world, casting an eerie shroud over the town. This was the night that I, an investigative journalist, descended into its heart, my destiny entwined with the vicious rumors whispered through the town's darkened alleys. With relentless determination, I armed myself with a notebook brimming with empty pages and a camera ready to capture the unfathomable. I treaded into the enigmatic woods, where the tall, gnarled trees stood like ancient sentinels guarding secrets not meant for mortal eyes. As I ventured deeper into the woods, a chilling sensation settled over me, akin to 1,000 unseen eyes fixated on my every move. The air seemed to hum with trepidation and veiled horror, wrapping around me like a cold, clammy shroud. My steps led me to discover an old and decrepit cabin shrouded in a veil of shadows, its windows shattered. Vines had woven a twisted tapestry upon its walls, reclaiming the decaying structure. The sight alone should have been enough to deter any soul, but I was possessed by curiosity, my heart and mind locked in a relentless dance between fear and the thirst for revelation. I gingerly pushed open the creaking door, its mournful groan slicing through the stifling silence. The air within was a tangible presence, laden with a nauseating stench that seemed to originate from the depths of decay and something far more sinister. A creeping dread inched its way up my spine as I stepped cautiously over the threshold, the beam of my flashlight casting long, wavering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The cabin appeared to be a place of assembly for malevolent souls, its very foundations bearing witness to unspeakable rituals. Bizarre symbols had been etched into the floor and walls, each mark speaking of a sinister devotion. The further I ventured, the more the atmosphere clung to me like a heavy, oppressive shroud suffocating me with its vile secrets. It was as though the very walls whispered in dark tongues, recounting tales of unspeakable atrocities committed in the name of an unfathomable power. Then, just as dread was about to consume me entirely, a rustling emanated from behind me, causing me to spin around with a heart-pounding urgency. The beam of my flashlight flickered, revealing a tattered rug beneath my feet. It was there, nestled in the very fabric of the cabin, that I discovered a hidden trapdoor. The moment hung suspended like a drawn breath as I hesitated, my courage and insatiable curiosity wrestling in the recesses of my mind. I mustered my will, my fingers trembling as I pried open the trapdoor. Below, I descended into a narrow, dimly lit tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth's bowels. Each step further was a descent into a nightmarish abyss. The dread that clung to me thickened with each passing moment as the ancient whispers of the cult's loathsome practices resounded in my mind. Minutes stretched into hours, and time seemed to slip through my fingers like elusive shadows. But finally, I stumbled upon a chamber that froze my very soul. It was a place of wicked sanctity adorned with ominous symbols etched in profane ink. Eerie altars, crafted for unholy rituals, defiled the sanctity of the room, casting an oppressive malevolence. At the center, an abhorrent statue loomed, a grotesque figure that seemed to observe me with an uncanny awareness. Terror coursed through my veins, but I was resolute in my quest for the truth. My camera clicked, and my pen scratched against my notebook, recording the terrible tableau before me. The chamber's ground felt unnaturally cold beneath my feet, and an insidious chill permeated my bones. Faint, distant chanting echoed through the labyrinthine tunnels, intertwining with the pulsating beat of my racing heart. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was not alone in this forsaken labyrinth. I turned to leave, my steps hastened by a growing sense of unease, but I took a wrong turn in my disorientation. The labyrinth of tunnels conspired against me, twisting into a bewildering maze. Then, as if guided by some sinister hand, I stumbled into an obscure, hidden chamber. Before me stood a ghastly congregation of cultists, their faces concealed behind grotesque masks that mirrored the malevolence that dwelled within their souls. Their chants grew louder and more frantic, echoing like a dark, pulsating heartbeat through the chamber. Paralyzed with fear, I remained shrouded in the shadows, my very breath suspended in my lungs, praying that they wouldn't sense my presence. The cultists had gathered around a blood-stained altar upon which lay a young man, his wide eyes reflecting the terror that gripped his very soul. My heart turned to ice as I witnessed the unthinkable ritual unfolding before my very eyes. The cultists chanted in a guttural ancient language, their devotion intensifying with every incantation. A dagger, its blade gleaming malevolently, was raised high in preparation for the unspeakable sacrifice. My instincts finally surged to the forefront, propelling me to break free from my petrified state. In a desperate bid for escape, I turned and fled into the darkness. My frantic footsteps echoed through the labyrinthine tunnels, my flight fueled by the very essence of fear itself. I knocked over a precarious stack of crates, causing a raucous clatter that reverberated through the chamber like the tolling of my own doom. The cultists froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the disturbance. Their malevolent gaze settled upon me in that dreadful moment, hidden in the shadows. A chilling tableau of terror ensued, with the cultists converging toward my location, their masks obscuring any trace of humanity. In my trembling retreat, I knew my chances of escape were rapidly diminishing. Yet I refused to submit to the grasp of diabolic fate. I sprinted through the tunnels, each step bringing me closer to freedom. The cultists' relentless pursuit echoed behind me, their chants growing louder, the stench of blood and decay enveloping me like an ominous shroud. The labyrinth seemed interminable, a cruel riddle designed to trap me. But my determination to survive, to unveil the truth, propelled me forward. Miraculously, I stumbled upon the elusive entrance, and as I burst into the open air, the night seemed to gasp in relief. The sinister grip of the cult loosened, and I sprinted toward my car, the cacophonous footsteps of the cultists fading into the distance. The bitter presence of Willow Creek clung to me, even as I sped away, like a haunting specter that refused to relinquish its grip. But I never returned to Willow Creek. The chilling memories of that harrowing night remained etched in my psyche, a grim reminder of the horrors concealed beneath the facade of a seemingly peaceful town. The sinister cult of Willow Creek continued to practice its unholy rites in the shadows, leaving an indelible mark of terror on anyone who dared to uncover the unfathomable truth. It was a memory I would carry to my grave, a constant reminder of the darkness hidden beneath the surface of even the most serene places. Second story. When I was a kid, I lived in a small town outside Toronto. My town has been linked to some pretty haunting things that give it a bad name, but Yellow Creek still remains a pretty and safe, secluded small town even after what happened 20 years ago. When I was younger, I had a very unhealthy obsession with stuffed animals. Now everyone had stuffed animals as a kid, but for me many would say I had too many. Like most kids, I played with all of them and had my favorites. My favorite, of course, was the giant stuffed panda bear I had that sat on my homemade shelf where all the others sat. This stuffed bear sat in the middle because of its size, and it was certainly not hard to miss. Late one night, I remember waking to the sound of footsteps in my room. This was not unusual, as my dad would often come in to check for dirty clothes I may have left on the floor, or just to simply make sure that I was truly sleeping. I did like to stay up late after all. However, that night I wish I had stayed asleep, because nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There in the far corner of my room, I saw it sitting there very much alive, and moving around was the giant stuffed panda bear. I attempted to scream, but nothing came out. It was as if my body was in a paralyzed state of shock. The bear turned to me and whispered, "I'm going to kill you." A smile came across the stuffed bear's face as he said this. Shaking and now covered in urine, my 9-year-old self managed to finally move, jumping from my bed past the demonic stuffed panda and down to my parents' room, where my dad was actually awake. Stumbling through my parents' bedroom door out of breath, I screamed, "My stuffed animal is alive. It's alive, help." My dad looked at me for a second, rubbing his eyes and yawning before saying, "Junior, go back to bed. You had a bad dream. That is all. It was a dream. It's okay. There is nothing in your room that is going to hurt you." I looked at him with teary eyes and muttered, "But there it is trying to kill me." My mom, who had worked in an hour, was awake at this point, hugging me and asking me if I was okay. "He is fine, Maggie. Go back to sleep," my dad said, starting to get frustrated. "There is clearly something that upset him, Dave. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you cleaned up and back to bed." I followed my mom into the bathroom, where I cleaned up and followed her back to my room. However, when I got back in my room, and the stuffed panda was just as I had left it the afternoon before, sitting upright and untouched. My mom tucked me in and kissed my forehead as I placed my head back down on my pillow to go back to sleep. The next day came and went, and it was that time again to brush my teeth and get into bed. I can't remember a time when I was more scared to get into bed and close my eyes than I was in that moment. Laying in bed, all I could do was stare at that shelf, waiting and knowing it was going to move again. I eventually fell asleep. However, I wasn't asleep long. Once again, I found myself awaking to the sound of someone or something being in my room. I attempted to sit up in my bed, and when I did, I was met with the sight of red, glowing eyes of my stuffed panda, this time holding a knife. "I told you I'm going to kill you." With one swift motion, the stuffed panda drove the blade into my leg, turning it and twisting it into my flesh. I screamed in pain and agony as the blade pierced my skin. I threw my body around, trying to shake him off of me. Just like that, it was over. My parents were in the room at this point, and the stuffed pandas were back on the shelf as if it had never left its spot. I tried explaining it to my parents, as if they would even begin to understand, and all my parents could say to me was that it would be okay. They took me to the hospital, and I was treated for the gash on my leg. All I really remember from this was that I had to also talk to some strange man I had never met before and tell him about my dreams. I was too young to understand it at the time, but my parents had told the hospital that I stabbed myself in a fit of rage triggered by stress. We did eventually return home, and when we did, the stuffed panda was destroyed and burned, as I couldn't bear the sight of it anymore. It has been 20 years, and my family no longer lives in the area or owns any properties out in Yellow Creek. Until this day, 20 years later, I still can't sleep properly or step foot into any toy stores. My daughter's birthday is coming up, and she asked for a stuffed bear, and I said yes. Third story. I lay weeping in bed, trying my best to keep my sobs at an absolute minimum, lest I wake up my father to suffer another beating. Only moments prior, I had been scratched badly by the satanic spawn we called a cat. Not to give anyone the wrong idea, even at the age of 4, I loved animals, but that creature was something else entirely, scooped out from my dead uncle's apartment, feral and full of hatred. At the smallest provocation, it would dig its claws into our skin, which was of course the reason why my father forced it to sleep in my room. Afraid my blood would stain the sheets, I snuck down into the kitchen to wash myself off as quietly as I could. I shivered as I passed the basement door, hearing the familiar groans emerging from the depths. My mother had blamed the sounds on the wind, but without any windows or even a faint draft pulling through. Something about it was clearly wrong. The cat rushed past my legs, hissing as it rushed under the sofa. I hated that creature and the connection to my father it represented. Ignoring it, I proceeded into the kitchen. I turned the tap just enough for a few drops of water to pour out onto my dripping wound. It burned as I cleaned it, but I couldn't even let out a mild yelp in pain. I couldn't risk waking my parents up. I carefully tore a piece of paper towel from its roll, checking behind me in fear. Then I heard a sound emerging from the entrance, sending a wave of panic down my spine as I worried that I might have woken my parents up despite my best efforts. But the fear was immediately replaced by relief as I realized it was just the basement door creaking open. with a slightly damaged frame, it tended to slide open at random points throughout the day and night. Small taps echoed through the living room as I heard our cat rush down into the basement. The last time it had been let in there, it somehow broke its leg on the way down, another event where fault was placed in my hands. If my father somehow figured out that I'd let him down there again, he'd know that I'd let it out at night, which meant I'd face hell in the morning. So, as much as I hated the creature, I had to venture down into the basement and retrieve him before he managed to wound himself. I hid the paper towel in my pajama pant pocket, leaving no trace behind as I followed the little beast down into the basement. As I reached the door that stood ajar, I could hear him hissing from the bottom of the staircase. A part of me worried he might scratch or even bite me again, but I'd rather suffer 1,000 cuts from his claws than another beating from my so-called guardian. I proceeded, taking single, slow steps down the creaky staircase. The cat had fallen silent, but a new sound had taken his place, a bizarre, squishing sound akin to meat being pushed through an old, hand-driven grinder coupled with heavy breathing. Still, I continued, too worried about the consequences if I refused. Cracking sounds followed, crunch after crunch, echoing up the stairs. Then, stepping on a rotten piece of wood, the step broke, sending me pummeling down the rest of the stairs, where I roughly landed on the concrete floor below. By then, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. In a mixture of pain and fear, I started to sob, crying loudly in the darkness, alone in the night. My only solace was that the sounds in the basement might not be making up to the bedroom where my parents slept. Maybe I'd even be allowed to weep in peace. But reality begged to differ, as a presence in the darkness had awoken. "Why do you cry, child?" a deep, raspy voice asked. I turned around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. It hadn't been either of my parents, I knew that much, yet it felt oddly familiar. "Here," it let out in a mere whisper. The sound had come from a wall in the darkest corners of the basement, one just barely touched by the faint moonlight daring to shine in from the living room above. Only then did the metallic stench and scent of rotten meat hit my nostrils, causing me to recoil in disgust. On the floor lay a pool of fresh blood, shining gently in the dimmest of lights. It had come from our cat, I could gather that much, but the rest of his body was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Smokey?" I asked with a trembling voice. "You cared for the small creature?" the voice asked, seemingly curious. "No, I hate him," I let out in protest, almost angered by the mere sentiment. "Then why do you want to find it? I have witnessed the pain it has caused you. I have heard your cries." "He belongs to my dad," I explained. "He'll be angry at me." "I apologize," the voice said. I required sustenance. Though young, I was well familiar with the concept of death, and with a pool of blood before me and its accompanying stench assaulting me, I realized there was no turning back. I started crying again, knowing how badly I'd messed up. "What am I going to do?" I sobbed, to no response. "Who even are you?" "Who I am?" it repeated. "I do not know." The peculiar statement somehow set a stop to my whines. It was such an odd concept to my young mind that a sentient being able to talk didn't have an identity it was aware of. "You don't know?" I asked. "No. Who are you?" it asked in return. "I'm Helena," I introduced myself. "Why don't you have a name?" I was never granted a name. "Why not?" "No person has ever acknowledged my presence. I have been alone for millennia." My childhood mind was easily distracted. Presented with such a unique, bizarre situation, I could refocus my mind away from the horrors that would undoubtedly await me in the morning. The verbal abuse, even the beatings. "How about I name you then?" I asked, starting to feel almost comforted by the being's unexplained presence. "What name will you bestow upon me?" I let out as I mulled over the best name a 4-year-old could conjure. "How about Leo?" I suggested, stealing the name from one of my favorite cartoons. "Yes, Leo will suffice," the voice said. And that night, an extraordinarily bizarre friendship began. Living far out on the countryside with close to no other kids my own age, I really hadn't grown up with anyone other than the occasional stray animal wandering onto our land. So, having someone I could talk to without fearing a beating made me feel the first ounce of happiness I'd experienced during my albeit short stay on Earth. Oddly enough, when providing an excuse to my parents that our cat had escaped through a window at night, I wasn't punished all too severely. In fact, they both seemed relieved that the monster had vanished from our house, and the traces of blood tainting the basement had all but vanished as night faded in the morning light. Following that event, I took it upon myself to feed Leo. I'd usually go down into the basement at night and spend a few hours after dark talking to Leo. I fed him whatever scraps of meat we had left behind in the fridge, which he appreciated as he told me stories of a world I hadn't the faintest chance of comprehending. I quickly learned that only flesh could sustain him. He explained to me that the fresher the meat was, the better. But to get a hold of food, I had to be sneaky. Usually, I'd await my father's return from work. He'd always stop by the bar and for a few drinks and would end up getting quite drunk. I could smell the alcohol reeking off him as he stumbled into the living room, only to pass out onto the couch. Once I could hear him snoring, I'd sneak into the kitchen, put some crumbs on a plate which I placed next to him on the sofa, and feed the rest to the kind beast in the basement. Doing that, my father would usually wake up in a drunken slumber in the middle of the night, thinking he'd mindlessly consumed it before passing out. For 3 years, this strategy worked. My father still remained the scum of the earth he'd always been, but he remained none the wiser about the fact that I had a friend living within our basement walls. Over the years, he'd even begun to grow. His voice had gotten more prominent, even a mouth had formed in the walls, one filled with jagged, rotting teeth. Every day I'd feed him, a task growing progressively more difficult as he grew larger. Inevitably, the food stolen from our fridge would be too much. Just before my 9th birthday, Leo had asked for a larger meal. I stole the majority of a leftover rotisserie chicken. But as I stumbled back to the basement, the snores emerging from my father's mouth abruptly stopped. "What are you doing, you little shit?" he asked, angry at me before he even realized what was going on. But then he saw the chicken, obviously thinking I was about to steal it for myself. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I wasn't," I stuttered. What followed was the same cascade of drunken abuse I knew all too well, followed by a few slaps to the face, leaving behind red marks and a black eye. I took it all, knowing there was nothing I could say to justify my actions, knowing I was too weak to defend myself, and knowing my mother feared the man just as much as I did. I was alone, left with no one in the world to protect me, no one except for Leo. "Why are you crying?" Leo asked as I greeted him that night. "What happened?" "My dad," I began, unable to continue between sobs. "I couldn't get you the food. I'm sorry." "Let me punish him," Leo said, a suggestion I'd heard before, but one I'd rejected on several occasions. "I can't?" I repeated. "Why would you defend a man who has caused you nothing but suffering since the day you emerged into this world?" Leo asked, almost sounding disappointed. For a moment I wondered what our lives would be like without him. If my mom and I could finally find some semblance of peace without that monster looming above us. Maybe I had just finally reached my breaking point, or maybe I was starting to lose empathy as I aged. Whatever the case on that day, I finally agreed to let the wall in our basement take care of our greatest problem. "How?" I asked. With that, we formed a simple yet effective plan. But making my father enter the basement itself remained our biggest hurdle. It had been moldy and wet for decades, and had even been left empty since before I was born. My dad has no reason to descend these stairs, unless I tricked him, that was. In addition, I had to do it on a day my mother wasn't home. Months would pass before the opportunity arose, but when it did, I quickly set the plan into action. As usual, my father returned late at night from the bar, and I patiently waited for him to pass out in a drunken stupor. Once he was fast asleep, I took the few toys I had, strewed them across the living room floor with a trail leading down into the basement. I could have just hidden down there, loudly announcing my presence, but though I knew what had to be done, I wasn't brave enough to witness the act itself. All I needed was for the man himself to think I was down there. Sure enough, as soon as he awoke, still slightly drunk, he noticed the mess on the floor. Calling my name to receive no response, he walked along the trail, kicking and breaking the toys as he passed. All the while, he demanded I show myself. What he didn't realize was that I was hiding in the untouched guest room, peeking out through a crack in the door. I stared out in anticipation, only to notice my father hesitate as he reached the top of the basement stairs. "Helena," he said with a slightly softer voice, "just come up. I'm not mad at you. I just want to talk." He spoke almost with care, too afraid to venture down into the basement, as if he too knew that something beyond his comprehension lurked down there, a being that just didn't belong to our world. "Come on, I'm waiting," he went on. In response, a quiet laugh emerged from the basement. While it wasn't mine, it didn't sound like Leo's either, as if he attempted to mimic me. In fact, I wasn't sure I'd ever heard my friend laugh before, nor did I know that he was capable of humor. Still, the laugh sent my father back into a blind rage. Screaming my name, promising another beating, he went charging into the basement. In the clear, I rushed out from my hiding spot and jammed a chair under the door handle. He was trapped. There was no way out. "What the hell?" my father began, but his voice quickly turned to blood-curdling screams as the wall got to work on him. His bones cracked, and his flesh was torn to shreds as the man screamed in absolute agony. I covered my ears, almost daring to regret an act I could never undo. Though I held no love for the man, it pained me to hear him helplessly beg for his life. But as soon as the yells had begun, they turned to incomprehensible gurgles as blood filled his lungs. Before long, silence once again filled the empty house, and a sense of uneasy peace filled my soul. "Dad," I called out, checking if I'd get a response. "Leo," I went on, still nothing. Afraid of the sight that would meet me in the basement, I remained upstairs, sitting in front of the door, half expecting something terrible to emerge from the dark. Hours passed, and my mother eventually returned home from another night shift, finding me on the couch, pale as a sheet. "Where's your father?" she asked, too tired to notice the rough state I was in. "I don't know," I responded meekly, sure she'd figure out what I'd done. But all I got in return was an unenthusiastic "huh" before she went to sleep. Even when her husband failed to show himself in the morning, she didn't seem to care all that much, as if his absence didn't bother her. While it wasn't unusual for him to stay out drinking until the middle of the night, he almost always showed himself in the early morning hours. A couple of days turned into a week, and my father still hadn't showed up. Though suspicious at first, my mom started to appear more at ease, almost daring to smile. It wasn't until the second week before we finally decided to inform the police, not because we missed him, but because it would seem suspicious if we didn't. It wasn't the first time they'd been to our house, seeing how the man treated us and all. But as soon as they appeared, he'd be a model citizen, and he'd always find a way to make Mom forgive him. Without charges to press, we were left to suffer his abuse. No proper investigation was ever launched. It was simply assumed that the man had abandoned us, a situation that suited us well. During the next few years, my mom and I would finally get a chance to bond, and my life started improving. Bit by bit, the memory of a nightmarish childhood began to fade. Of course, Leo remained my secret friend up through my formative teenage years. But with his appetite ever growing, feeding him had become somewhat of a problem. Where scraps and raw meat had once sufficed, he now wanted fresh kills. I resorted to getting a part-time job at a local butcher, sneaking out what little I could, and using the rest of my salary to buy gamed meat from hunters and farms. For a short while, the meat sufficed. It could sustain the growing being in our basement. For every day that passed, more and more distinctive features formed: arms, fingers, claws. Leo kept getting bigger, almost taking up the entirety of the basement wall. And as time passed, it became abundantly clear that my efforts alone wouldn't be enough to satiate his ever-growing hunger forever. "I require sustenance," he begged. "I just fed you," I argued back. "More," he almost yelled, his voice echoing through the basement. By that time, eyes had formed alongside the mouth, and spikes emerged around the wall, forming a primitive facial structure. "What do you want, then?" "I don't really have much money left." "I long for the taste of living flesh," he said. "Pink, warm skin, trembling muscle, soft fat." "You're talking about—" I began, not daring to finish the sentence. "Humans," he went on, finishing the thought for me. I can't. I'm not a murderer." Hearing my mother parking her car outside, I ended the argument there and rushed upstairs. Leo had been my guardian for all these years, saving me from an abusive household. But I wasn't about to murder anyone for his sake, not again. For the next few days, I tossed the meat down into the basement without talking to him, upset with his evolving desires. I started spending more time in my room, far enough away not to hear his soft whispers. But ignoring the creature would not be an option, as one day, while chatting with a friend on the phone, I heard a voice calling for me from downstairs. "Helena?" Mom called. I ran down to check what she needed, met by a puzzled expression on her face. "What is it?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," she said. "I just thought I heard you calling from the basement. Did you want to speak to me or something?" Knowing I hadn't said anything, it didn't take me long to realize who exactly had called her name from the basement. But not willing to tell her the truth, my thoughts raced to come up with a suitable excuse. "Hey, I was just talking on the phone." "You must have misheard me," I lied poorly, but she believed me, having no reason to mistrust me on such a pointless lie. That night, I waited for my mother to fall asleep before I ventured back down into the depths of the basement. My heart was filled with a mixture of fear and anger. The creature I had once named Friend had attempted to murder my mother. "You returned?" Leo said softly, almost surprised at my presence. "You tried to kill my mother," I said, jumping straight to the point. "I must consume flesh," he said, sounding almost weak, his words quieter than usual. "I am famished. I've been feeding you the same things as I always have been ever since we met. It no longer satiates me. I require unspoiled flesh. I require living meat." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not doing this anymore." "You would allow me to perish?" "I will keep feeding you animal meat, but I'm not going to kill anyone for your cravings, and I can't forgive you for trying to kill my mother." Leo didn't respond, seeming to contemplate my harsh words. I had already decided to end our friendship, but I wasn't ready to let him die. So I would keep tossing down freshly hunted game purchased from local farmers and hunters without entering the basement. That way I could avoid engaging in any sort of conversation with the beast. Only then I could live with a semi-clean conscience. For months and years I fed the beast, never speaking a single word. During the nights I could hear him groan and beg for flesh, but I refused to listen. It was a miracle that my mother never caught on, but in her advancing years her hearing had started to fade, and her mind with it. Though she'd barely entered her 50s, the years of alcohol to deal with the trauma caused by my father had worn on her soul, and though I tried to get her help, she never truly recovered. Then, one day, as I returned home from work in the evening, my mother was no longer there to greet me. I found her body in her bed. She had passed while taking a nap. There she lay, looking as if she were just sleeping, but entirely different lighter, tired, absent. I did what I could in a futile attempt at resuscitation, but her body had already gone cold. There was nothing left to be done. It was determined during the autopsy that she'd passed peacefully in her sleep. Her heart had grown tired and simply ceased to beat. I could take comfort in the fact that she never saw it coming, and that she at least experienced a handful of semi-happy years before leaving this world. But with her gone, I truly was alone. Another year passed, and I remained alone in an inherited house I knew wasn't truly empty. Once I entered college, I even started dating, meeting a guy, Martin, who seemed to tick all the boxes. Time passed, and though the memories lingered, they appeared as painless scars, serving as little more than reminders of old wounds sustained. For a while, we were happy. He had just finished college by the time I entered my freshman year. I was 19, he was 24. He was a private man who moved here from a couple of states over, finding work at a local bar. He never talked about his past, nor why he'd left everything he knew behind, which should have been the first sign of things to come, had I only been that wise. Growing up, seeing my mother get hit by my father, I always judged her for choosing a man who could hurt her like that. Though I felt guilty, I couldn't help but pity her for staying. I never thought in a million years that I'd be stupid enough to fall into a similar trap. Oh, how naive I was. As it turns out, mistakes can cross the boundaries of generations and can be repeated no matter how careful you think you are. Martin first hit me during what felt like an innocuous argument. He didn't even seem that angry, so I never saw it coming. Too in shock, I couldn't even respond. A man I thought I could spend the rest of my life with had just put his hands on me, but I was in too deep to just leave. It started with outbursts like these, followed by profuse apologies and love bombing. Then the cycle would repeat. Step by step, my freedom was taken from me. I couldn't dress the way I wanted. I couldn't spend time alone with the few friends I had. At some point, I wasn't even allowed to leave the house without supervision. It happened so fast, I almost suffered whiplash. But before I knew it, he had taken full control over my life. The man who had entered my house might as well have been a reincarnation of the man I called father. No sooner had that realization hit me than I decided I wasn't going to take the abuse lying down. I started to form a plan of escape. I still had some money from my inheritance left, not enough for a luxurious lifestyle by any means, but enough to leave town and never look back. Martin could have the house for all I cared, a place haunted by decades of abuse, cursed beyond the ability to be cleansed. I just needed to find the perfect time for my escape. I chose the date, waited for Martin to leave for work, and started packing my bags without hesitation. He never returned home early since he didn't have a flexible work schedule, nor did he call in sick, enjoying the attention he got from drunk girls at the bar. If only they knew the monster he truly was. But as I tore down the shelves in a frantic attempt at making a swift escape, something caught my eye, a reflection bouncing off a small glass surface, a camera hidden among my personal effects in my bedroom, pointing directly at my bed where my bags lay half-packed. Without having to ask, I knew Martin had been watching me from afar, which meant he'd be back home any minute. I decided to drop the rest and leave with whatever I already had packed. But as I ran for the door, Martin entered with a knowing, furious expression plastered across his face. "You think you can just leave?" he yelled as he pulled the bags from my hands. I tried to push him away, and though I was no weakling by any means, he was far larger. I didn't stand a chance. "How do you not understand this?" he said as he grabbed my arm and started pulling me back into the house. "You belong to me." I continued to fight back to the best of my ability, twisting around, punching him, all to no avail. Then, with one final push, he pulled my shoulder joint straight out from its socket. "Let me go," I half demanded, half begged between screams of agony. Then, not sure where to put me, he opted for the room closest to our struggle, the one most easily locked up the basement. A room I knew lay barren, but one that had never been empty. He ripped open the door and pushed me inside, letting me roll down the stairs towards the bottom, where I remained on the floor, battered, bruised, and with a dislocated shoulder. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you really left me no choice," he said before closing and locking the door behind him. I was trapped. Lying on the floor, I just cried like I had so many years prior, the first time I met Leo at the ripe old age of 4. And just like then, the beast answered, ready to hear my pleas for help. "Why do you cry, child?" The voice called out, weaker than I'd ever heard it before. "I'm not a child anymore," I responded, and still nothing has changed. "But you are still so little. I can help you," Leo went on, a suggestion I was all too familiar with. "Not this time," I replied. "I can't keep fighting anymore. Just let it be over." "No!" Leo exclaimed much louder than before. "It is not your time. You must continue your journey." "Why?" I asked. "What's the point?" "Your purpose is yet to be revealed." "What do you mean?" "Keep fighting." "I can't." "You will?" "I'm too weak to fight him." "You are not alone." "Why would you help me? After I abandoned you," my voice trailed off. Before Leo could respond, the door shot open and Martin stumbled in, a gun in his hand, one I didn't even know he owned. "I hate that it had to come to this," he began as he walked down the stairs. "But I can't exactly keep you down here forever. This will be easier on both of us." With one arm refusing to cooperate, I pushed myself up and crawled towards the basement wall, knowing fully well I had no chance of outrunning a bullet. But Martin would want to make it personal. He wouldn't attack from a distance. Sure enough, he descended all the way down the stairs, walked up to me with an empty look in his eyes. He didn't attempt to further explain himself, nor did he offer a chance for reconciliation. In his mind, I had betrayed him, and that was all it took. He lifted the gun, pointing it directly at my head, as if preparing to take out a rabid dog. I could only close my eyes and wait for him to pull the trigger, but such mercy would never come. Instead, the silent atmosphere was shattered by Martin's blood-curdling screams as his flesh was torn from bone. I could feel his blood splatter across my face. But that time, for once, I decided not to hide from an act I had partially been responsible for. Though his demise was the consequence of his own actions, I felt like I deserved some credit. I opened my eyes and saw for the first time how the creature in the wall consumed its prey. Dozens of arm-like appendages extended from the wall, tearing into him with long claws that tore through his skin, fat, and muscle as if they were butter. All he could do was scream until his chest was torn open and blood started to fill his lungs. What little remaining of his rapidly expiring body was incorporated into the wall, consumed by my guardian. Then the world fell silent once more, and I was saved. "You are safe," Leo said, softly breaking the silence. "I know," was all I could respond. Thank you for always being there when I need you. Our bond will never break, and because of you, I am at last satiated. But this does not mark the end of our coexistence. This is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Later, little one. Now I must rest." With that, Leo fell asleep, a rest I granted him as I attempted to process all the horrors I'd experienced since my childhood to this day. That day, I decided I would grant my Savior whatever he desired, be it the flesh from living people or revenge on his enemies. I would let no innocent person suffer, nor would I choose at random. I would actively seek out those deserving of a gruesome death and lure them to my house where Leo could feast. I knew it would be no easy task, but I would do it for him. Throughout my entire miserable life, he had been my one constant, the only presence that had accompanied me. I would do whatever it took. But as I descended the basement on the following day to let Leo in on my plan to serve him, I was met with an empty wall. Where Leo had once lived was a large indent in the basement's foundation, as if he had just upped and left. A sadness emerged in my chest as I thought the creature had abandoned me. But just the previous day, he had promised that we were interconnected. It couldn't be a lie. Yet, as the weeks passed, the basement remained silent. Even as I tossed down whatever meat I had in the fridge, it just lay on the floor to rot. Leo, whatever he had been, was truly gone from my life. Then reports of missing people started showing up on the news, mostly vagrants or criminals on the run from the police, people that wouldn't quickly be missed, but in a large enough number that people started to notice. They would just vanish with no trace, no bodies were ever found, nor did they show up in other cities or even states. Week by week, the reports kept getting more frequent, and I knew exactly who was responsible. Leo's hunger had kept growing even after he emerged from my basement, a lust for flesh that could not be truly satiated. Though the people didn't necessarily deserve to be consumed, I knew there was nothing in this world that could stop him. But even if I could, I had sworn my loyalty to him. It was a thought that followed me even as I slept in my bed at night. I wondered how far he would go before he had finally consumed enough, and if the people killed deserved it, or if they were innocents found at the wrong place at the wrong time. Just as I lingered between the world of the waking people and the realms of sleep, a voice snatched me back to attention, one all too familiar. "Hello, little one," Leo spoke softly through the dark, closer than I'd ever heard him. Shooting up in bed, I saw a dark silhouette standing in the dark, 9 feet tall, hunched over to prevent his head from hitting the ceiling. Several arms stretched from his torso, ending in razor-sharp claws, and the stench of rotten flesh emanated with his raspy breath. "Leo?" I asked. "Yes," he responded. "I have come for you. It is time." "Time for what?" "Time to fulfill your purpose beyond this realm," he said. What purpose?" I stuttered. "This world no longer belongs within the reach of mankind's filthy grasp. But you are different. Come with us, and I promise you safe passage to the realm of Urkala. No one will ever hurt you again." "What about the people living here?" "You no longer need concern yourself with their well-being, but you must come with us now." I just stared speechlessly at the creature who I'd grown up calling Leo, only to now realize he was something else entirely, spawned from a world I had no concept of, one focused only on conquering the world I'd grown up in. But as he patiently awaited a reply, I thought back to all the pain and suffering I'd endured, the false kindness I'd been given, only to face years of abuse. If this was the world I had, I wasn't sure it was one I wished to protect. "What do you say, little one?" And with that, my purpose became clear. The entirety of my span in this realm, the lessons it had taught me, the people I had to endure. I knew exactly what I had to do. Fourth story. The night was cold and damp as I trudged through the dense forest. The moon barely peeked through the thick canopy of trees, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance in the darkness. I was alone, armed only with a feeble flashlight and the chilling silence that surrounded me. I had always been drawn to the mysterious allure of abandoned places, and the old mansion deep in the heart of the forest was no exception. The locals spoke in hushed tones about its haunted history, warning anyone who dared to venture near. But the thrill of the unknown was too tempting for me to resist. As I approached the looming mansion, a shiver ran down my spine. The once grand structure now stood dilapidated, its windows shattered and doors creaking on rusty hinges. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the mansion itself held its breath, waiting for something. I pushed open the creaky front door, and the hinges groaned in protest. The musty scent of decay filled my nostrils, and I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to continue. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed on into the darkness. The interior was a maze of forgotten rooms and decaying furniture. Dust hung in the air like a spectral mist, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. As I wandered deeper into the mansion, a faint whisper echoed through the empty halls, sending a chill down my spine. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, desperate to convince myself that I was in control. I entered a grand ballroom, its once opulent chandeliers now reduced to dangling cobwebs. The moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting eerie patterns on the cracked marble floor. It was in this hauntingly beautiful space that I felt a presence, a sinister energy that seemed to watch my every move. The air grew colder as I moved further into the ballroom. The whispering became more distinct, like voices carried by the wind. I strained to make out the words, but they were just beyond the edge of comprehension. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to flicker, taking on unnatural shapes that sent a shiver down my spine. I reached the center of the ballroom, where a grand chandelier still hung precariously. Suddenly, the air grew thick and the temperature plummeted. The whispering escalated into an unsettling cacophony, and I felt a presence closing in around me. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my flashlight, desperately scanning the room for any sign of what was happening. That's when I saw her, a spectral figure in a tattered ball gown, her eyes hollow and filled with a haunting sorrow. She glided towards me, her movements slow and deliberate. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to tear my eyes away from the ghostly apparition. The whispers turned into anguished wails, and the room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The ghostly figure spoke, her voice a chilling echo that reverberated through the ballroom. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her words sending shivers down my spine. I stammered, struggling to find my voice. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to explore." The ghost's eyes bore into mine, and she let out a mournful wail. "You cannot escape the darkness that dwells here. You've awakened something that should have remained undisturbed." As she spoke, the room around me warped and twisted. The once grand ballroom now seemed to decay before my eyes, the walls closing in on me. The temperature dropped to an unbearable chill, and I could see my breath in the air. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape the spectral presence that enveloped me. The ghostly figure reached out, her icy fingers brushing against my skin. I felt a surge of numbing cold, and a paralyzing fear took hold of me. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in even tighter, the whispers growing louder and more menacing. In a final desperate attempt to escape, I turned and fled from the ballroom, the ghostly figure fading into the shadows behind me. I raced through the decaying halls, the mansion seemingly alive with a malevolent force. The walls groaned and whispered, and the air itself felt charged with an otherworldly energy. As I burst through the front door and stumbled into the cold night air, I felt a sudden release from the suffocating grip of the mansion. The whispers and wails faded into the distance, and I collapsed onto the damp ground, gasping for breath. The forest around me seemed to sigh in relief, as if the very trees held their breath during my encounter with the supernatural. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, the haunted mansion looming behind me like a dark specter in the night. As dawn broke, I mustered the strength to rise and leave the forest. The mansion stood silent and foreboding in the early morning light, its secrets hidden once again behind the crumbling walls. I stumbled away, haunted by the chilling memories of that fateful night, forever changed by the encounter with the spectral presence that dwelled within the abandoned